Welcome back to Omni-Wizard. Today's story: what if Harry Potter inherited Omni-Man's power and the women of the Justice League fell for him? Before we dive in, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Inheritance. The kettle had been screaming for 30 seconds before Harry realized he could hear the water boiling inside it. Not the whistle, the water. The roll and burst of each bubble against the copper base, distinct as separate voices, layered under the higher shriek of escaping steam. He stood in the small kitchen of the cottage outside Godric's Hollow with one hand braced on the counter, and listened to a sound no ordinary person had any business hearing, and he understood in a calm and distant way that something inside him had broken open. He turned off the hob. The silence afterward was not silence. A moth worried at the window glass. A car passed on the lane 2 fields over, and he could count the worn places in its engine. Somewhere under the floorboards, a mouse moved its small heart very fast. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the headaches, since the fever that no pepper-up potion would touch, since the night he had woken on the ceiling with the duvet tangled around his ankles and the bed 8 feet below him. He had told no one. There was no one to tell who would not have looked at him with the particular fear reserved for things that should not exist, and Harry had spent enough of his life being that kind of thing. He had decided, with the stubbornness that had carried him through worse, to handle it himself. He poured the tea anyway because the ritual steadied him, and because he had learned that pretending to be a man having a normal morning sometimes convinced his body to behave like one. He carried the cup to the table. He sat. He lifted it and the handle came away in his fingers, sheared clean from the cup, and the cup itself dropped and did not shatter on the flagstones because he caught it before it had fallen 4 inches, his hand simply there, faster than thought, faster than he had told it to move. Tea soaked into the front of his shirt. He did not feel the heat. "Right," he said to the empty kitchen. His voice came out level. He had always been better in a crisis than out of one, and his body had apparently decided that an ordinary Tuesday was a crisis. "Right, let's find out then." He went out to the field behind the cottage, where the grass came up to his knees and the morning was the color of weak cider, and he stopped pretending. The first time he left the ground, he did it without meaning to. He had only thought about it, the way you might think about lifting your arm, and the earth fell away beneath his boots with the unhurried obedience of a thing that had decided he was in charge. He hung there 4 feet up, then 10, then 30, the wind off the hills moving against his face, the cottage shrinking to a toy below him. No broom, no charm, no incantation muttered through gritted teeth. The flight came out of him the way breath did, and it asked nothing in return. He laughed once, a short sound torn out of him, and then he flew. He went up until the cold thinned the air and the curve of the world showed itself at the edges of his sight, until Britain lay below him green and gray and stitched with rivers, and the sound of the human world fell to a murmur. He had ridden brooms since he was 11. He had loved the broom the way you love a fast horse, a partner you trusted and fought with and forgave. This was not that. This was the difference between holding a hawk on your wrist and being the hawk. There was nothing between him and the sky. He could have crossed the channel before the tea cooled. He could have torn the roof off Gringotts. He could have done a great many things, and the easy availability of all of them sat in his chest like a coal he had swallowed and could not put out. When he came down too hard. 100 feet of fall converted to impact before he thought to slow, and his boots drove into the field and threw up a fan of black earth, and the ground shuddered out from him in a ring that flattened the grass for 20 feet. He stood in the crater he had made and looked at his hands and felt, for the space of a breath, the loneliest he had been since the war. He knew when it had begun, though he had spent 3 weeks refusing to look at it directly. It had begun the night the war ended. He let the memory come now, standing in his ruined field because his father's warning had given it a shape at last. The last hour of the last battle, Voldemort's wand coming up. The green light he had walked into willingly in the forbidden forest to spare everyone he loved the cost of his living. He had felt himself die that night, as much as a man can feel such a thing, felt the world go to white and then to a long gray waiting room of a place. And he had come back because of old magic and older mercy, and everyone had said it was the sacrifice that saved him, the love, the blood. They had been right as far as it went, but Harry remembered something none of them had seen. In the instant the curse struck him, in the place past pain where the body decides whether to continue, something deep in him that had slept for 8 generations had been shaken awake by the nearness of death and had decided with a will entirely its own not yet. He had felt it then as a single hot thread pulled taut through his chest. He had told himself it was adrenaline and grief and the ordinary madness of surviving. He understood now that it had been the blood of Voss turning over in its long sleep, registering a killing blow and beginning, slowly, across 3 quiet years, to wake the rest of the way. The pain that should have killed him had instead lit a fuse. His father had told him exactly how it would happen, in a letter Harry had never read, and the letter had been waiting in a vault the whole time. And that was the thing that undid him a little, standing in the field. Not the power. The idea that James had known, had written it down, had tried across the years to catch him before it caught him first. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and was almost surprised to find it dry. Then he went to find the answer he already suspected was waiting. He walked into the village instead of flying, because walking was a thing ordinary people did, and he wanted to remember how. Godric's Hollow at that hour belonged to the milk float and the early dog walkers, and Harry went down the lane with his collar up and his hands in his pockets, trying to take ordinary-sized steps, trying not to hear the conversations behind the curtained windows or the worms turning in the gardens. He stopped at the churchyard. He had come to stand over his parents' graves perhaps a dozen times since the war, and the visits had never gotten easier, only quieter, and he supposed that was the most you could ask of grief. The headstone was the same: James Potter, Lily Potter, the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Harry read it the way he always did, and then he read it again because the words landed differently now that he had spent a morning learning he might not die at all. "I read your letter, Dad," he said to the stone. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "Bit of a thing to leave a man, you could have led with it." He crouched, balancing on the balls of his feet, and laid one hand flat against the cold granite. Careful, so careful, because he had cracked a teacup at dawn and he would sooner have died for good than put a fingerprint of damage on this. "You said be good. You said it's harder than being strong." He let out a breath that fogged in the churchyard air. "I'm starting to see what you meant. There's a voice. You weren't joking about the voice." The dead said nothing, which was their habit, and Harry found a strange comfort in it. The whole world had spent his life telling him what he was: chosen, marked, saved, dangerous. His parents had only ever, in the few words they'd left him, asked him to be good. It was the smallest inheritance anyone had tried to hand him, and the only one he had ever wanted. A sound reached him from the lane: a child's bicycle, the rattle of a loose mudguard, then the wet skid of a tire on the morning frost, and the short cry of a small body going down hard. Harry was over the churchyard wall before he had decided to move, and that was the problem in miniature, that the deciding had stopped being necessary, and he made himself slow on the far side so that what arrived at the fallen child was a man and not a blur. The girl was perhaps 7, sprawled with her bicycle across her legs, more frightened than hurt, a scrape on one palm welling red. Harry knelt and lifted the bicycle off her, and he did it with such deliberate, exaggerated gentleness that the frame did not so much as flex in his grip, though he could feel how readily it would have folded. "You're all right," he told her. "You came off at the worst speed, which is the slowest one. Hurts the most, hurts the least." He turned her scraped hand palm up and looked at it. He could have closed the cut with a thought and a word, and the temptation to was its own quiet lesson, because a healed hand in a Muggle village was a question he could not afford to answer. "Hold still." He pressed his clean handkerchief to it instead, the ordinary way, and held it there. "Press that till you get home. Your mum'll fuss, let her." The girl looked up at him with the frank, assessing stare children kept for adults who had not yet bored them. "You jumped the wall," she said. "The big wall." "I'm very tall," Harry said gravely. "You're not that tall." "It's a recent development." He set her back on the bicycle, steadied it, and gave it the smallest push, and she wobbled off down the lane with her bandaged hand and her story, and Harry stood in the cold and watched her go and understood, with a clarity that the morning had been building toward all along, exactly what was at stake. Not cities, not the world, this. A child on a bicycle who would grow up or wouldn't, who would be safe or wouldn't, in a world where men like the one he was becoming decided which. The voice in his blood would tell him he could keep her safer than the world ever could. The voice would even be right. That was what made it the most dangerous thing he had ever carried. He went back over the wall, climbing it with his hands this time, and then he went to find the answer. The Potter vault at Gringotts had been emptied of its gold years ago, distributed and invested and spent, but the goblins did not measure a vault's worth by gold alone, and Harry had never gone through the rest of it. He had not wanted to. The rest of it was his parents, and his parents were a grief he had learned to carry by not opening the box too often. The goblin who escorted him down said nothing about the way the cart's safety bar bent under Harry's grip when the track dropped, and Harry said nothing about it either, and they understood one another. The vault door rolled back on the smell of cold stone and old parchment. He found it in an iron casket at the back, under a folded christening gown and a tin of unspooled photographs, and he knew it was the thing he had come for because it was the only object in the vault that hummed against his new senses, a low resonance he felt in his teeth. A disk of metal, dark as a starless field and warm to the touch, the size of his palm, worked all over with lines that were not any alphabet he knew. Wrapped around it, brittle with age, a letter in his father's hand. James Potter had written it the year before he died. Harry sat down on the vault floor and read it by wandlight, and the cold of the stone came up through him, and he let it. Harry, it began, if you are reading this, then either I have grown old enough to give it to you myself, in which case you may safely ignore the dramatics and I will explain over a pint, or I have not, in which case I am sorry, and I need you to read all of it before you decide what kind of man it makes you. Our family keeps a story. Most pureblood families keep stories about how grand and ancient they are. Ours is stranger, and we have always been quieter about it, which I suppose tells you something about the Potters. The story is this. A long time ago, longer than the wand-maker's records go, a man fell out of the sky over the West Country. Not a man. A thing shaped like a man that bled and could be loved and could not be killed. The Peverils took him in. He married a Peveril daughter and called himself Voss, and he lived 8 generations and looked the same on the last day as the first. And when at last he chose to die, he asked to be buried standing, facing the stars, because he said he had come down from them and he was not sorry he had stayed. The wizards who knew him thought him a kind of demon, then a kind of saint, then simply old Voss who could lift a fallen oak off a child and who wept at weddings. We are his blood. It runs thin now, thin by every generation of ordinary witches and wizards who married into it, and in most of us it shows only as a knack. Potters live a little long, mend a little fast, fly a little better than we have any right to. Your grandfather could take a bludger to the chest and laugh. I once watched my mother bend straight a poker that 2 grown men had tied in a knot for a joke, but the blood remembers what it is. Voss told the Peverils, and the Peverils wrote it down, and it has come down to me as a warning I now give to you. The strength sleeps and pain wakes it. Great pain, the kind that should kill and does not. If it ever wakes in you fully, Harry, you will be able to do things that will frighten you, and the frightening part will not be the things. The frightening part will be how reasonable it feels to do them. Voss said his people were conquerors. He said the strength comes with a voice, and the voice is patient, and the voice is always, always telling you that you know best, and that the small, soft people around you would be safer if you simply decided things for them. He spent 8 generations not listening to it. He said that was the only thing he had ever done that he was proud of. The disc is his. He said it would know its own when its own had wakened. I have never been able to make it do anything but hum. Perhaps it was never meant for me. I love you. Whatever you are, I loved you before you were any of it. Be good. It is harder than being strong, and it is the only thing worth being. Dad. Harry read it twice. The wandlight guttered, and he steadied it without looking at it. When he set the parchment down, his hand was very careful, because he had already broken a teacup that morning, and he did not want to break his father's last letter to him. The disc had warmed further while he read, and now the lines across its face were no longer dark. They burned a deep arterial red, and when he closed his hand around it, the metal yielded under his fingers like clay and then sprang back, and a voice that was not sound spoke directly into the bones of his skull, in a language he did not know and understood perfectly. Blood of Viltrum, it said, record and remember. And then it showed him, in the space behind his eyes, a world of red skies and white towers and people who flew, and it showed him what they did to the worlds they found. They were called Viltrumites, and they were the strongest thing the galaxy had yet produced, and they had decided long ago that strength was the only argument that mattered. The vision did not flinch from it. It showed him their empire the way the empire saw itself, not as monsters but as gardeners, walking from world to world, weighing each one, keeping the strong and culling the weak so that what survived would be worthy of the stars. It showed him a conqueror standing over a city he had reduced to ash in an afternoon, and the conqueror was not laughing, was not raging, was only tired, the way a farmer is tired after a hard but necessary day. It showed Harry that the cruelty was sincere, and that the sincerity was the worst of it, because a cruelty that believed itself a kindness could not be reasoned out of anything. And it showed him, last of all and quietest of all, that he was one of them. Deluded, sleeping, half-tamed by 8 generations of ordinary love, but one of them, and the part of him that had thought this is nothing while a train hung from his shoulders, recognized the people in the vision the way you recognize your own reflection in a darkened window, imperfectly with a lurch and undeniably. He understood at last exactly what he had inherited, and exactly how reasonable the voice could be made to sound. When it was finished, he was shaking, and not from fear. No, he told the disc, and his voice came out rough and curt. I heard you. The answers number. The lines went dark. The disc cooled. Whatever lived inside it, it seemed willing to wait, and Harry thought that was probably the most honest thing it had told him. He did not go home. He could not have sat in the cottage and listened to the mouse's heart all night. So he flew, low and slow, learning the throttle of himself over the dark spine of the country, and somewhere over the orange smear of a sleeping city, the night cracked open with a sound he felt before he heard, a tearing roar climbing fast off the river, and he turned toward it because that was the only direction he had ever known how to turn. A tanker had broken its moorings on the swollen river and gone broadside into a rail bridge, and the bridge was full of a late commuter train, and the tanker was on fire. Harry took all of this in during the second it cost him to drop out of the sky, his new eyes resolving the scene in a clarity that was almost unbearable. The buckled girders, the carriage tilting over the gap, the bright frantic shapes of people behind the windows, the fire walking hand over hand up the spilled fuel toward the supports. He caught the carriage first. It had begun to slide, the coupling sheared, 200 tons of steel and glass and frightened people tipping toward 40 feet of black water and burning oil, and he put himself under it and stopped it. The strength came up through him in a flood and the carriage stopped, and the screaming inside it changed pitch from falling to held. He stood on the broken edge of the bridge with the whole weight of it on his shoulders and his boots sinking slowly into the deck plating, and he breathed and he thought with a clarity that frightened him more than the weight, "This is nothing. I could hold 10 of these." He did not hold 10 of these. He held this one and he walked it back from the edge, plate by groaning plate, until it sat square on what remained of the rail. Then the fire reached the supports and the bridge began to come down. He could not hold the bridge and clear the carriage both. The maths of it arrived cold and immediate. So he stopped doing maths and started doing magic, which he had not had a chance to test against his new strength, and which answered him now like a hound that had been straining at the leash. Aguamenti. He did not so much cast it as open a door and let it through, and the water that came was not the polite stream of a school charm but a roaring column the width of a road, and it took the fire off the supports and the spilled fuel and the deck in one long sweeping blow and dropped the temperature of the whole catastrophe by what felt like a season. Steam went up in a wall. Under cover of it he moved, faster than the eye, tore the doors off the carriage with his fingers, and carried people 2 and 3 at a time across the broken span to solid ground, so quickly that to the survivors it seemed afterward that they had blinked on the bridge and opened their eyes on the bank, delivered, with no clear memory of the hands that had done it. He was reaching for the last of them, an old man frozen in his seat with his fingers locked white on the rail, when the woman dropped out of the sky on the other side of the carriage and the night changed. She landed without sound, which should not have been possible for someone moving that fast, and she came up out of the crouch like a thing poured rather than built, and the river light ran along armor the color of old blood and beaten gold. He knew who she was, everyone knew who she was. The whole world knew the woman who had walked out of a hidden island and into the worst war the century had on offer and ended it. He had only never expected to be close enough to see that her eyes, finding his across the wreck, held no fear at all, only a swift and total assessment, the look of a soldier sizing up an unknown standing on a battlefield. "You're holding the train," Wonder Woman said. It was not a question. Her voice carried over the roar of the river without apparent effort, low and even and used to being obeyed. "I'm holding the train," Harry agreed. "Can you keep holding it for 90 seconds? I can hold it until it rusts." Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile, the expression of a professional recognizing another professional and being privately, fiercely glad of the company. She vaulted the gap, 20 feet of open air and fire-bright water beneath her, and landed inside the tilted carriage, and the old man with the white knuckles found himself suddenly cradled in the arms of a legend and carried out, and Harry held the train, and between the two of them the bridge gave up the last of its living, all of them, every one. When it was done, they stood together on the bank in the strobe of the arriving sirens, 2 impossible people in a crowd of ordinary terrified ones, and she turned the full force of that assessing gaze on him, and Harry felt himself measured by someone equipped to measure him and found that he did not mind it. "I don't know you," Diana said. "Number you fly. You're strong enough to hold a derailed train above the water for as long as you choose. You used what looked like genuine sorcery to put out a chemical fire, which I have not seen in a long time, and the last person I saw do anything close to it was not a friend." She tilted her head. "And you ran toward this before anyone called you. Heroes who do that are made over years. I have not heard your name, and I make a point of hearing names. So, a beat, who are you?" He could have lied. He was good at lying when it mattered, and a great deal of his life had taught him that telling powerful people the truth about what you were tended to end with you in a cell or a cage or a story other people told about you. But he was tired, and the disc was a weight in his coat, and there was something in the level steadiness of her that made the lie feel small. "Harry," he said. "Harry Potter." And until about 3 weeks ago, I'd have told you I was an ordinary wizard who fought one war too many and retired to grow vegetables badly. I'm still working out the rest of it. He held her gaze. I'm not your enemy. I don't know yet what I am, but I know that much. The sirens washed red and blue across her armor. Somewhere behind them, a paramedic was sobbing with relief into a radio. Diana studied him for a long moment, and whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find enough of it. Harry Potter, she said, trying the name, and it sounded different in her mouth, weighed and accepted. You held a train tonight that I could not have held alone. Men with your gifts usually want something for it. Tell me what you want, and I will tell you whether you can have it. A cup of tea that doesn't come apart in my hand, he said, and to be left to figure out what's happening to me before anyone decides what I am for me. He paused. And I'd like to know your name, the one your friends use. I've only ever had the one off the news, and it feels like a uniform. The almost smile came back, more certain this time. Diana, she said. Diana, he inclined his head. Thank you for the 90 seconds. You did not need them, she said, and that was the closest thing to a compliment he would get, and he understood that too. She did not arrest him. She did not, in fact, do anything the news would have predicted, which was the first thing that made Harry decide he could trust her further than he trusted most. She gave him a small device, a flat black coin that warmed when she pressed her thumb to it, and told him it would let him reach the League if he chose to, and that they would likely come looking for him whether he chose to or not, because that was their job. And a flying wizard who could hold a train was precisely the kind of thing they were obliged to be curious about. You could come now, she offered. There was no threat under it, only a soldier's directness. Answer their questions on your own terms instead of theirs. It is what I would do. I will, Harry said. Soon. I've something to settle first with myself. She accepted that, which surprised him, and then she went up into the dark, the way water goes down a drain, smooth and total, and he was alone on the bank with the sirens and the saved. He flew home as the sky grayed. The cottage was as he had left it, the teacup on the table with its handle beside it, the field behind torn where he had landed too hard. He sat at the table and put the black coin and the black disc side by side in front of him, the two halves of the choice he could feel arranging itself around him, and he made tea, and this time the cup held together because he had begun already to learn the trick of gentleness in a body built for the opposite. He thought about his father's letter, be good, it is harder than being strong. He thought about the voice in the disc and how it had not snarled or threatened, how it had only reasonably, sweetly shown him a better ordered world and asked him to want it. He thought about the moment under the train when he had heard himself think this is nothing, how true it had been, and how dangerous a true thing could be. And he thought about the woman who had dropped out of the sky, who had not been afraid of him, who had handed him a way to reach her and then turned her back and flown away, trusting him with the space behind her. No one had trusted Harry with their turned back in a long time. The war had made everyone watchful. It struck him, sitting in the gray morning over a cup of tea that did not break, that he had spent the whole of the train rescue without once feeling alone, and that the feeling had a face now, and that this was either the best thing that had happened to him in years or the beginning of a different kind of trouble. Probably both, he told the empty kitchen. The disc hummed very low, the way a cat purrs when it wants you to think it is asleep. He left it on the table. He did not throw it away, which he noticed and did not examine, and he went out into the field to learn himself. He approached it the way he approached everything he intended to survive, which was as a problem to be taken apart. The strength was not the danger. The strength without measurement was the danger. So he measured. He started with the disused tractor rusting at the field's edge, and he lifted it one-handed, and then he set himself the harder task of lifting it slowly, of holding it at the exact height of his own chest and not a finger higher, of setting it down without driving its wheels into the soil. He did this until the motion stopped being a feat and started being a habit, because a habit was a thing the body would do correctly even when the mind was occupied with something trying to kill him. He tested the marriage of the two halves of himself next, the wizard and the other thing, because that was the part no book had a chapter for. He cast a shield charm and then walked his fist into it, and where the charm should have flared and held against any ordinary blow, it shattered like frost, which told him something useful and unsettling. He could break his own magic now simply by meaning to. He reversed the experiment. He laid a cushioning charm over his knuckles and struck the boulder at the hedge line, and the boulder came apart, and his hand did not so much as sting. And he stood looking at the gravel that had been a ton of granite and understood that he had just invented a way to hit something as hard as he could without the world ever hearing the impact. The voice in his blood admired it. He noted that the voice admired it and went on anyway. He learned the throttle on speed last because speed frightened him most. A man who moved faster than thought could arrive somewhere before his conscience did. So he ran the boundary of the field, slow at first, then faster, until the hedgerows blurred to a green smear and the wind he made flattened the grass behind him. And then he forced himself to stop on a mark he had set, a flat stone the size of a coin, and to stop on it exactly again and again, until he could come out of a dead sprint and place his boot on the stone without overshooting by the width of a hair. Control was not the absence of power. He had worked that much out on the bridge. Control was power that had learned where to stand. By the time the sun cleared the hedge, he could land without breaking the grass, lift without crushing, strike without sound, and stop on a coin from full speed, and he was wringing wet and more tired in his mind than his body, which no longer seemed to tire at all. He sat down among the marks of his morning's work and let himself feel something close to satisfaction, then made himself get up, because satisfaction was how you stopped getting better, and the thing in his blood had 10,000 years of practice, and he had a single morning, and he intended to close that gap before anyone ever needed him to. The Death Eaters who came for him 3 nights later did not know what he had become, which was the only reason they came at all. There were 6 of them, a cell that had gone to ground after the war and stayed loyal to a master who was supposed to be dead, and they had heard, through the long whisper lines of the defeated, that Harry Potter was living alone and unwarded in a cottage outside Godric's Hollow, growing vegetables gone soft. They came at the hour the old books recommended for murder, and they came confident, and Harry, who had been awake because he no longer needed much sleep and had been lying on the cottage roof watching the satellites cross like slow stars, heard the first of them apparate in from half a mile off, heard the crack of displaced air and the grunt of a heavy man landing badly, and was standing in his own dark kitchen waiting before the rest had finished arriving. He let them set up. He was curious in the cold way the strength made everything curious now about what they would do, and curiosity was its own kind of danger he was learning to watch in himself. They blew the door in. Harry stood in the wreckage of it with his hands loose at his sides and let the first 3 curses hit him. They were good curses. 2 cutting hexes and a blasting jinx that would have taken a wall down, and they struck him full and broke against him like water against a cliff, and he felt them the way you feel a draft. The green light he had dreaded his whole life, and one of them, panicking now, did throw the green light, the unforgivable thing, the curse that had made him an orphan, and the green light struck him over the heart and died there, and he stood in his ruined doorway entirely alive, and the silence afterward had a quality he recognized from a long time ago. It was the silence of men who have just learned that the rules they trusted do not apply. "Hello," Harry said quietly. "You should have stayed gone." He did not kill them. This was the thing he held onto afterward, lying awake on the roof again with the wreckage cleared and the 6 of them trussed and floating gently a foot off the floor of his sitting room for the Aurors to collect. He had wanted to. The voice from the disc had been there at his shoulder the whole time, patient and warm, narrating how simple it would be, how clean, how much safer the world would be with these 6 particular pieces of cruelty removed from it permanently, and how no one would ever know, and how it was, when you considered it honestly, only sensible. And Harry had moved through all 6 of them in the space of a held breath, faster than their wands, faster than their eyes, and had broken the bones in their wand arms and only those bones, and disarmed them and bound them and left them whole. It had been the hardest thing he had done in years, not the fighting. The fighting was nothing now. The hard thing had been the stopping, the deliberate clenching down of a strength that wanted to keep going, that found the going so easy and so just. He understood his father's letter completely now, in his body where understanding lived truest. The frightening part was not the strength. The frightening part was how reasonable it felt. When the Aurors had gone, taking their bewildered prisoners and their unanswered questions, Harry took the black coin from the kitchen table and pressed his thumb to it the way Diana had shown him, and felt it warm, and somewhere very far away and very high up he knew a light had come on with his name beside it. He looked at the disc, which had gone dark and quiet, sulking, he thought, like a thing that had made its best argument and lost. "I'm going to need help," he told it. "Not yours, theirs, people who will tell me no when I stop being able to tell it to myself." He did not expect the disc to answer, and it did not. But the cottage was quiet in a way that felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, like rest rather than waiting, and out the broken doorway the field lay silver under the moon, the grass standing straight where he had taught himself to land without breaking it. The watchtower's conference room hung above the curve of the earth, and the planet turned slow and blew through the great window while 7 people argued about a man who had held a train. The footage played on a loop across the table's surface. The buckled bridge, the tilting carriage, a dark-haired figure stepping under 200 tons of steel and stopping it as though catching a door. Then the column of water that had no business coming out of a human hand. Then the figure moving across the broken span faster than the cameras could follow, blurring, delivering the living to the bank one after another after another. He cleared the carriage in 11 seconds, Batman said. He did not raise his voice. He never did. The room had learned to go quiet around him instead. 41 passengers, no casualties, no witnesses who can describe how. And the chemical fire was put out by something my sensors logged as conjured water, which is not a category I enjoy having on a report. Magic, said the woman leaning against the window with her arms folded, and the word came out of her with the relish of someone who had been waiting all meeting to say it. Zatanna Zatara wore the cut of a stage magician and the eyes of someone who had seen the things stage magicians only pretended at, and she watched the footage with an interest that had gone well past professional. Real magic, old magic, not the borrowed kind. I felt it from the surface when he did it, like a struck bell. Whoever he is, he didn't learn that in a lab, he was born into it. She tilted her head. And then there's the other thing he's got, which is decidedly not magic, and which I would very much like a name for. Viltrumite, Hawkgirl said. The room turned to her. Shayera Hall stood apart from the table with her wings half-mantled and her mace resting against her shoulder, and her face had the flat hardness of someone delivering news she had hoped never to deliver. The flight, the strength, walking through a blasting curse like weather. Thanagar keeps records of the empires that matter, and the Viltrum Empire matters more than any of them. They're conquerors, the real kind, the kind that have been doing it for 10,000 years and gotten good at it. If that's what he is, then he is the single most dangerous individual on this planet, and it is not close. He used that danger to save 41 strangers he'll never meet, said Black Canary. Dinah Lance sat forward with her boots on the table's edge, and where Hawkgirl was all blunt warning, Canary's voice had warmth under the steel, the warmth of someone who had grown up around enough hard men to know the difference between hard and cruel. Nobody made him. Nobody was watching that he knew of. He heard a bridge come down and he went, and then he handed Diana the last man out and didn't so much as wait for a thank you. I've been doing this a long time. That's not how the dangerous ones behave when they think no one's keeping score. Both of you are right, Diana said, and the room settled, because when Diana spoke in that particular register, the room always settled. She stood at the head of the table with the earth turning behind her and the loop of footage through moving light up across the planes of her face. He is the most dangerous person any of us has stood beside in years. I felt it on that bridge the way you feel a cliff edge in the dark. One careless motion from him and I would not be here to report it. She let that sit. And he ran toward the screaming before anyone called him, and he told me the truth when a lie would have served him better. And when I turned my back on him and flew away, he let me. He has been awake to this power for 3 weeks by his own account, and in 3 weeks he has used it only to lift things off of people. I have known gods who could not say the same after 3 days. Superman, who had been quiet, who was usually quiet when the question was whether to fear a strong man, spoke from across the table. 3 weeks, he said. Still learning the throttle. I remember 3 weeks in. You break door handles. You hear too much. You lie awake terrified of what you'll do if you stop paying attention for 1 second. He looked at the footage at the dark-haired man setting the carriage down plate by careful plate. Look at how slow he's going at the end there. He's not showing off. He's rationing it. He's scared of it. A man who's scared of his own strength and uses it to save people anyway is a man I want in the room, not out of it. Or he's a man who knows exactly how he looks on camera, Batman said. There weren't supposed to be cameras, Diana said. That's rather the point. A silence held over the table. The earth turned. Jaons, who had said nothing the entire meeting, who had been sitting with his eyes half closed and his attention pitched at something none of the rest of them could perceive, finally stirred. I touched the edge of his mind, the Martian said in the slow, grave voice that always made the room listen. Only the edge. He's well defended, better defended than anyone I have met who is not trained against telepaths, which is itself worth noting. But I felt the shape of what is in there. He folded his hands. There is a great strength in him, and the strength has a voice, and the voice is very old and very patient, and it is not his. It speaks to him constantly. It tells him he should rule. It tells him the soft people around him would be safer under his hand. He paused, and he answers it. All day, every day he answers it. I have rarely felt a mind work so hard at remaining decent. He is not safe because he lacks the capacity for harm. He is the most capable of harm I have ever read. He is safe because he gets up every morning and chooses, against a voice that never tires, not to be. The footage reached its end and began again. The bridge buckled, the carriage tilted. The dark-haired man stepped under it and held. So, Zatanna said softly, watching him hold it, and there was something in her face now that had moved past curiosity into a territory she did not name aloud. When do we go and say hello? Diana pressed her thumb to the console, and the light with Harry's name beside it bright, because somewhere far below a man in the wreck of his own front door had just decided to ask for help. He already said it first, she told them. We go now. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, The Weight of Strangers. They came down out of a clear noon sky 3 days after he pressed the coin, and Harry was in the garden pulling weeds the slow way by hand, because he had found that doing one thing at human speed each morning kept the rest of him honest. He felt them before he saw them, the way he now felt most things, the displacement of air a mile up, the particular gravity of bodies that did not move the way bodies were supposed to. 3 of them, he kept pulling weeds. He had decided somewhere in the small hours that the first impression he wanted to make on the people he was asking for help was the impression of a man who could be interrupted in his garden and not mind it. Diana landed first, light on the turned soil, and behind her a man in red and blue whose feet touched the earth so lightly the earth might have been grateful, and a third who descended last and whose green skin and steady molten eyes told Harry more about caution than any weapon would have. The Martian had come to read him. Harry had expected that. He left his occlumency exactly where it was, neither walled nor open, a house with the curtains drawn and the door unlocked, and he straightened up and wiped the dirt from his hands on his jeans. "You brought the heavy hitters," Harry said. "I'm flattered, or I should be worried. I never can tell with this lot." "Both, probably," said the man in red and blue, and his smile was the disarming kind, the kind that had clearly cost him years of practice to keep from frightening people. "Clark, though up there they'll want you to call me Superman, and down here I'd rather you didn't call me anything in front of the neighbors." He offered a hand. Harry looked at it for a moment, then took it, and the two of them shook with the exquisite mutual care of men who had each, separately, learned what their hands could do, and neither of them crushed the other, and something passed between them in that restraint that was its own conversation. "Harry," he said, "and I already met Diana. She didn't arrest me, which I'm told is unusual." "She doesn't arrest the ones she likes," said Clark. "She fights them instead. It's a compliment. You'll get used to it." "I heard that," Diana said without turning, and the corner of her mouth moved. The Martian stepped forward last and did not offer a hand. "I am Jaons," he said in that voice like stone settling. "I have been in the edges of your thoughts, Harry Potter. I will not pretend otherwise. It would be a poor beginning." "It would," Harry agreed. "What did you find?" "A man arguing with himself and winning, for now." Jaons' eyes held his without blinking. "And a great deal of grief that you have learned to carry by calling it work. You and I will understand each other, I think. My world is ash. I know what it is to be the last of a thing and to carry the strength of it like a debt." Harry had not expected that, and for a moment the noon garden was very quiet, and the weeds lay in their pulled heap between them, and he found he had nothing dry to say. "Yeah," he managed. "All right, come up then. I'll put the kettle on, except I can't, so one of you can do it without breaking the cup." "I'll do it," said Diana. "I have the gentlest hands here, and I have killed gods with them. There's a lesson in that, if you want one." "I'm collecting them," Harry said. "Lessons, it's a recent hobby." The watchtower was not what he expected, which was that it was warmer. He had braced for a fortress and found instead a place that people lived in, mugs left on consoles, a corridor where someone had taped up a child's drawing of the team with all their heads too big, a faint persistent smell of coffee that no amount of recycled air had managed to defeat. They took him through it the long way, and Harry understood that the tour was also a test, that they were watching how he moved through their home, whether he touched things, whether he looked at the exits. He looked at the exits. He could not help it. But he kept his hands to himself, and he slowed his step to match Diana's. A red blur resolved into a young man eating what appeared to be 3 sandwiches at once, who looked Harry up and down at a speed Harry's eyes could actually follow and seemed obscurely disappointed by it. "So you're the wizard," said the Flash around a mouthful. "Diana fought you and didn't win and came back smiling, which has literally never happened, so the whole station's been weird all week. No pressure, welcome. Don't touch my pudding cups, they're labeled." He was gone before Harry had finished deciding whether to be amused, leaving a faint smell of ozone and mustard. "You'll meet John when he's back from off-world," Clark said. "Green Lantern, he'll want to scan you and pretend he isn't. Try not to take it personally, the ring makes people thorough." "I'm being catalogued," Harry observed. "You're being welcomed," Diana corrected. "It looks the same from the outside, you'll learn the difference." They passed the great window with the earth turning beneath it, and Harry stopped, because anyone with a soul would have stopped. "That never gets old," said a voice behind him, and he turned to find the woman from the footage he had not seen yet, the one in the stage magician's cut, leaning in a doorway with her arms crossed and her dark eyes bright with the particular interest of a professional who had finally met a puzzle worth her time. "Zatanna," she said, "I'm the one who felt you from orbit. You rang like a bell, you know that." Whole hemisphere of the mystic community sat up at once. "We thought a god had moved house." "Sorry," Harry said. "I'll try to ring more quietly." "Don't you dare." She pushed off the doorframe and circled him once slowly, the way you walk around a horse you're thinking of buying, and Harry let her because he had decided to let all of them look their fill today and get it over with. "Old magic," she murmured half to herself. "Hereditary, wand trained, but you've outgrown the wand, and under it, woven right through it, something that isn't magic at all. The two of them shouldn't fit together. They should be tearing you apart from the inside." She stopped in front of him and tilted her head. Why aren't they? I've been wondering that myself, Harry said. Best guess, 8 generations of practice. The blood learned to live in wizards a long time before it woke up in me. The magic makes room for it. It's not a marriage, it's more of a long bad habit they've both agreed to keep. Zatanna's eyes lit and she laughed, a real laugh surprised out of her. Oh, you're going to be trouble, she said with something close to delight. The handsome ones always think in metaphors. It's insufferable. Say something arrogant so I can stop liking you. I held a train above a river for 2 minutes and didn't drop it, Harry said. I'm rather good. There it is, she grinned. Better, now I can work with you. Across the room, Diana watched the exchange with an expression Harry could not read, and chose deliberately not to try. Zatanna got him alone that evening, in a room she had warded into something between a library and a workshop, and she made him put the disc on the table between them. She did not touch it. She walked her fingers through the air above it instead, tracing shapes, and the candles she favored over the watchtower's clean light guttered and leaned toward the metal as though it were breathing. There it is, she said softly. That's where the bell note comes from, not you, this. It's a record and a key and a leash all at once, and it's been waiting in your family longer than my family's been doing magic, and that is a genuinely upsetting amount of time. She withdrew her hand. It talks to you. Constantly, Harry said. When I let it, it showed me what they are the first day. It thinks it's helping, that's the worst part. It isn't lying to me. It's just very sure I'd be happier if I stopped pretending to be small. And you keep it on your kitchen table. Zatanna looked at him across the candlelight, and the playfulness had gone quiet, replaced by something more careful. You could have buried it in the deepest vault on this station. You could have asked me to seal it, and I could have more or less. You didn't. Why? Harry was quiet for a moment. Because hiding from a thing is how it wins, he said finally. I spent a childhood being told there was a darkness inside me, a piece of someone else, and I beat it by looking straight at it until it had nothing left to whisper that I hadn't already heard. This is the same fight, older and stronger, and it'll last the rest of my life instead of 7 years, but it's the same fight. You don't win it by not looking. You win it by looking every single day and choosing anyway. Zatanna held his eyes for a long beat, and then she reached out not for the disc but for his hand, and she turned it palm up on the table and traced one careful line across it, the way a fortune-teller would, except there was real magic in it, a warm thread that sank into his skin and settled there. Protection, she said, brisk again, covering the moment. Mine. If that thing ever gets too loud, squeeze your hand and you'll hear me instead. I'm a more interesting voice anyway, and I never tell anyone to conquer anything. She let go and stood and gathered her candles. Go to bed, wizard, you ring less when you're rested. They tested him, of course. Batman ran him through a battery of sensors in a white room, and recorded numbers that made him quiet in a way the others clearly found ominous. Jayon sat across a table and asked him careful questions about the voice in his blood, and Harry answered them, all of them, even the ones that cost him. Batman found him afterward in the corridor the way Batman found everyone, by being already there when you arrived. He did not waste words on a greeting. I don't trust you, he said. I want that on the record between us because everyone else has decided to like you, and someone in this building has to keep a clear head about what you are. He held Harry's eyes through the cowl, unblinking. You are the most dangerous individual I have ever logged, by an order of magnitude, and the only thing standing between you and a catastrophe is your own decision to be decent, and decisions can change. I have watched good men become monsters over far less than what's in your blood. You're right, Harry said. On all of it, I'd be worried if you weren't saying it. He leaned against the corridor wall, careful even in that, careful in everything. Here's the part you'll like less. I want you to keep away to stop me, not the others. They'd never build it. They've decided to trust me, and they're too good to plan for the day they're wrong. You're not, so build it. Whatever it is, nth metal, magic, a sun, I don't care. Build the thing that stops me and keep it where I can't find it, and never tell me what it is. I'll sleep better knowing it exists. He met the cowl's stare. A man with my power who doesn't want to be checked is exactly the man who needs checking. I want to be checked. That's the whole of it. Batman looked at him for a long moment, and something in the set of him shifted fractionally, the closest he came to revising an opinion. I already built it, he said, 3 weeks ago, the day Diana brought you up. Good, Harry said, don't tell me where. I wasn't going to. And Batman was gone down the corridor, soundless, and Harry understood that he had just passed a test more important than any of the sensors, and that the distrust of a man who built the thing that could stop you was worth more in the end than the easy faith of 100 who wouldn't. But the test that mattered was the one Diana proposed, and she proposed it the way she proposed everything, directly, without ceremony, over the remains of a meal in the commissary while the others pretended not to listen. I want to fight you, she said, not to hurt you, to know you. There are things about a person you can only learn by how they move when someone is trying to put them down. I have read every report Bruce wrote, and I trust none of them as much as I would trust 3 minutes in a ring with you. She set down her fork. You may refuse. Most people refuse me. I'm not going to refuse you, Harry said, but I should tell you something first so it's fair. He turned his cup in his hands, the slow, careful turn he gave everything fragile now. When I fight, the voice gets louder. It likes fighting. It's very good at it, and it wants me to be very good at it, and the line between defending myself and enjoying myself is thinner than I'd like. If I cross it, you need to be ready to stop me, and you need to know that stopping me might be real work. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because you're trusting me with your turn back again, and I'd rather you knew what's standing behind you. The commissary had gone quiet in earnest now. Diana looked at him for a long moment, and what was in her face was not fear and was not pity. It was recognition, the specific recognition of a warrior who had spent her own long life keeping a leash on the thing inside her that loved the work too much. I have stood across from beings who could end this world and enjoyed the standing, she said. I know the line you mean. I have walked it. The fact that you named it out loud to a room full of strangers before a fight you could win tells me more than 3 minutes ever could. She rose. Come, let us learn each other anyway. The naming was the test. You passed it. Now I simply want to see you move. The training room could take a hit from Superman and ask for another, and they used most of it. Harry had expected to win in the cold corner of himself that had stopped doubting his own strength, and he was wrong, and the wrongness was the best thing that had happened to him since the power woke. Diana was not stronger than he was. He understood that within the first exchange, when he caught a blow on his crossed forearms that should have rung him like a gong and felt only the honest impact of it, no give, no danger. She was not stronger. She was better than he had any framework for 4,000 years of war refined into a body that did not waste a single motion, that read his intentions in the set of his shoulders before he had finished forming them, that turned his own overwhelming force into the lever that put him on the floor. He got up. He got up a great many times. The room learned the shape of their fight, his raw, impossible power against her impossible craft, his speed against her anticipation, and every time he thought he had found the angle she had already closed it, smiling now, alive in the work the way he was beginning to understand she was rarely allowed to be. He stopped holding back as much. She made him stop. Come properly, she said once, ducking under a blow that cratered the wall behind her, or I will think you do not respect me. And so he came properly, and it was glorious, and it was still not enough. Somewhere in the 3rd minute, with his lip split and healing even as it split, with Diana's lasso humming a hand's breadth from his throat and her knee in his sternum and the whole weight of her holding him to the mat, Harry started to laugh because he could have thrown her through the wall, through the next 3 walls into orbit. And instead he was pinned, and it was wonderful. It was the most wonderful thing, to be in the presence of someone he could not simply overpower. Someone in front of whom the voice in his blood had gone, at last, blessedly quiet, because the voice had nothing to say to a problem it could not solve by being strongest. You're laughing, Diana said, not releasing him. You've no idea, Harry said, how loud the quiet is in my head right now. There's nothing in there telling me to win. You've shut it up. I could kiss you for it, and I don't even mean that the way it sounds, although now that I've said it out loud I notice I might. Diana went still above him. The lasso's glow lit the underside of her jaw. And then she did the thing he would think about for a long time afterward. She did not pull away, and she did not pretend she had not heard, and she did not make it small. She held his eyes, and she let the moment be exactly as large as it was, and then she rose off him and offered her hand and pulled him up with an ease that delighted him all over again. You fight like a man who has decided not to be a weapon, she said, and is having to invent the way of it as he goes, because no one ever taught him, because no one like you has existed to be taught. It is clumsy. It is the bravest clumsy thing I have seen in a century. She was still holding his hand. She seemed to notice this at the same moment he did, and she did not let go for a beat longer than she needed to, and then she did. We will do this again, often. You need someone you can lose to and someone you cannot beat, and on this world there is precisely one of each, and I am both. Lucky me, Harry said, and meant it down to the floor. Hawkgirl found him later on the observation deck, where he had gone to be alone with the turning earth and had not quite managed it. She did not announce herself. She simply dropped out of the dark of the upper gantry and landed beside him, wings folding with a sound like a tent collapsing, mace hung at her hip, and stood looking out at the planet with him for a while before she spoke, and when she spoke it was without preamble because Shayera Hall did not own any. You want to know what they do, she said. Your people, the ones whose blood you're carrying around, you've been too polite to ask and everyone's been too scared to tell you, so I'll tell you because I've seen the records and somebody on this station should say it to your face. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were the fierce flat gold of a bird of prey. A Viltrumite scout comes to a world, one, just one. He spends a few decades learning it, blending in, sometimes building a life, a real one, a family, because the Empire's smart enough to know that a man with roots fights harder for the harvest. And when the world's ripe, the scout sends the signal, and the Empire comes, and they offer the planet a choice. Join and be culled down to only the strong and spend the rest of forever as soldiers for the next conquest, or refuse. She let that sit. The worlds that refuse they make examples of, not for cruelty, for efficiency. A dead world that screamed loud enough saves them the trouble of the next 10. I know, Harry said quietly. The disc showed me. It wasn't apologetic about it. Then know this too. Shayera stepped closer, and there was nothing soft in her, and Harry was grateful for it, because the others had been kind, and kindness was not what he needed tonight. Half-breeds aren't supposed to exist. The Empire's careful about breeding. They keep the line strong on purpose, and a Viltrumite who goes native and makes children with the locals and lets the blood thin out across generations, that's not a son to them. That's contamination. If they ever find out what's on this rock, they won't see a hero. They'll see a deserter's mistake that learned to fly, and they will come to correct it, and correcting it will mean correcting everything around it. She held his gaze. I'm not telling you this to break you. You don't break, I can see that. It's annoying. I'm telling you because the others want to believe the danger is the voice in your head. It isn't. The voice in your head you can fight. The fleet you can't, and the fleet is real and it is out there, and one day it's going to notice that the West Country grew a Viltrumite, and on that day every person you started to care about up here is going to be standing between it and you. Harry was quiet for a long moment. Below them the Terminator line crept across an ocean, day giving way to night across a quarter of the world. Why are you the one telling me? He said finally. Not Batman, not Diana, you. Because Thanagar's been on the wrong end of an empire, Shayera said. I know the look of a world that doesn't know what's coming. I've worn it. She turned back to the window, and after a moment grudgingly, as though the words cost her something, she added, and because you spared 6 men today when the cold thing would have been easier, and I've fought beside a lot of strong people, and the strong ones who choose the hard thing when nobody's making them are rare enough that I'd like to keep this one alive. Don't make a thing of it. I'll deny it. Wouldn't dream of it, Harry said. The faintest edge of something that was not quite a smile crossed her hard face, and she mantled her wings and dropped back up into the dark. And Harry stood alone with the warning in the turning world, and found that he was not afraid exactly, but that he understood, for the first time, the true size of the room he had walked into. The threat arrived 4 days later, and it arrived wrong, and the wrongness was the first threat of a thing that would take all of them the better part of a year to unravel. It came as a distress call out of Bloodhaven, the bruised industrial city down the coast from Gotham, and it came labeled as an intergang weapons grab, which was ordinary, which was the sort of thing the League handled before breakfast. Harry went because Diana asked him to, and because he had spent days learning the Watchtower's corridors and was restless to do the thing he was actually for. They took him and Black Canary and Hawkgirl, and the 4 of them dropped into Bloodhaven through a sky the color of an old bruise. What they found in the gutted shell of a chemical plant was not ordinary at all. The intergang crews were there, the augmented muscle with their stolen apocalyptian hardware, the energy gauntlets and the heavy plate, and that much the League had fought before. But the men inside the plate were not moving like men defending a score. They were moving like men possessed, eyes filmed gray, mouths working in unison around words in a language Harry knew in his teeth and his nightmares. And over the great vat at the center of the floor hung a thing that made Zatanna's warnings about the mystic community suddenly very concrete. A wound in the air, a seam of red light, and through the seam half-born, a sigil Harry had last seen burned into the forearms of men he had grown up fearing. The dark mark. Stitched through with circuitry that did not belong to any world he had been born on. That's not possible, Harry said, very quietly, hovering at the flank of the catwalk above the floor. That magic died with the man who made it. I watched him die, I made sure. Apparently someone disagrees, said Black Canary, dropping into a crouch beside him, her voice low and even and entirely without the warmth he had heard from her in the commissary. Because this was work now, and Dinah Lance was very good at her work. And someone's married it to apocalyptian tech, which means someone's been shopping off-world, which means this just stopped being our problem and started being everybody's. She glanced at him. You said you made sure. You want to make sure again, because I count 30 hostiles and a hole in reality, and I'd like options. Take the men, Harry said. Don't kill them, they're not driving. Whatever's in the seam is doing the driving. I'll take the seam. You don't give the orders here, new guy, Hawkgirl said, mace already alight, wings flaring as she rose off the catwalk. But there was no heat in it, only the reflexive bluntness of a soldier establishing the chain, and then in the next breath, but it's a good call, so do it. Canary with me, Potter, if that thing eats you, I'm not explaining it to Diana. Noted, Harry said and dropped. He had been a wizard in a war once, and he had learned the unglamorous truth of it then, that you won the fights you'd already won before they started, by knowing the ground and the enemy and the exact thing you meant to do. He knew dark magic. He knew it better than anyone alive because it had hunted him from his cradle. And as he fell toward the seam he was already casting, already weaving the counter, his hands moving in the old precise shapes even as his body did the new impossible thing of arresting a 40-foot drop into a hover handspan from the floor. The possessed men turned on him as one. Hawkgirl came down among them like a thunderclap, her mace breaking plate and grounding the energy weapons in bursts of blue fire, and Canary's first cry, pitched and controlled, dropped a whole rank of them clutching their helmets, and the room dissolved into the particular chaos Harry had grown up inside. But he kept his attention on the seam, because the seam was the spine of it, and he had learned in the war that you broke a thing by its spine. Finite, he said, and meant it with the whole of his magic, and the seam shuddered but did not close, because there was a will on the other side of it holding it open, a will he recognized, a will that had once lived in the back of his own skull as a scar and a voice and a prophecy. The recognition went through him like cold water. He had been so sure. He had walked into a forest and died to be sure. The seam pulsed, and a voice came through it, thin and far and unmistakable, the high cold voice that had narrated the worst nights of his childhood. "Harry Potter," it said, and it was almost amused. "You have grown. I felt you wake. All the way out here in the dark between the doors I felt the old blood turn over in you, and I thought, there it is at last, the thing the prophecy never named. The boy who could not be killed because he was never only a boy." "You're an echo," Harry said, working as he spoke, layering the counterweave, feeling for the anchor that held the seam open the way you feel along a wall for the light switch. "A fragment. You died." "I'm talking to a recording that thinks it's a man." "I am patient," the voice said. "And I have found new friends and new doors, and you have no idea, child, how much larger the dark is than the little island you saved. You fought me for a country. We will be fighting for considerably more than that." The seam flared, and the possessed men screamed in unison, and the wound in the air began deliberately to tear wider, because the thing on the other side had decided that if it could not hold the door it would simply break the frame. And Harry felt the voice in his blood wake up and offer, sweetly, reasonably, a solution. "You are holding back," it said. In the patient way it said everything. "You are casting at it like the wizard you were. But you are not only that. The men below you are anchors. The magic runs through them, and the anchors and the door closes. 6 lives against a tear in the world. The arithmetic is not difficult. You have done harder sums than this. You hesitate only because they taught you to hesitate, and they are soft, and they are not here in your blood where the truth lives. End it. You know you can. You know it would work. You know in the part of you that does not lie that it is the correct and efficient and merciful choice." And the terrible thing, the thing Harry would turn over for nights afterward, was that the voice was right. It would have worked. 6 possessed men, already half gone, already screaming against a door into a dark that wanted his whole world. The arithmetic was not difficult. His hand was already moving, the strength was already gathering, faster than the others could stop him, faster than thought, and the room had narrowed to the cold, clean geometry of the solution. "Potter," Black Canary's voice, close, sharp, cutting across the cold. She had fought her way to his flank, and she was looking at his face, and she had clearly seen something in it she recognized, because she had spent her life around men who went somewhere cold inside a fight and did not always come back. "Hey, Harry, eyes on me, those are people. Whatever's wearing them, they're people, and they go home tonight, and you do not get to do their math for them. That's the whole job, that's the only job, you hearing me?" He heard her. It was the warmth under the steel, the same warmth from the commissary, deployed now like a weapon, deliberate, and it reached the part of him the cold had not yet swallowed. The strength he had gathered had to go somewhere. He turned, and he put it into the floor instead. A single open-palmed strike that did not touch a living soul but cracked the foundation of the chemical plant from the vat to the outer wall, and the shock of it staggered every man in the room and knocked the possessed off their feet and broke their unison chant for the half-second Harry needed. In that half-second he did it the hard way. He went to each of them faster than they could fall, and he laid a hand on each gray-filmed forehead, and instead of ending them he poured counter-magic through his palm directly into the curse riding them. The long, patient cleansing he had learned at the side of better men than him, burning the possession out the way you burn a leech off skin, and one by one the men dropped, freed, unconscious, breathing, alive. 6 of them, every one. The seam, robbed of its anchors, shrieked and began to close. "Sentiment," the cold voice said from the narrowing dark, and it was not amused now. "It will be the death of this world and of you, and I will be there to see it." "Get in line," Harry said, and reached into the closing seam with both hands and his whole impossible strength, and tore the frame of it the rest of the way shut, and the red light winked out, and the chemical plant fell silent except for the breathing of 6 saved men and the settling of the foundation he had broken. He hung there a moment in the sudden dark, the strength still humming in him with nowhere to go, and Black Canary put a hand on his shoulder, the ordinary human weight of it, and did not say anything, which was exactly right. They debriefed on the flight back, terse and professional, and then they debriefed properly in the watchtower. And the second debrief lasted most of the night because what they had found changed the shape of everything. Batman had the fragment on the table, the piece of apocalyptic circuitry they had pulled from the dead seam, and beside it his analysis, and beside that his face, which gave nothing away and somehow conveyed dread regardless. "It's genuine," he said. "Apocalyptic, old. The kind of hardware that doesn't fall off the back of a truck. Someone with reach into Darkseid's supply chain put this into the hands of street-level intergang and married it to a strain of human sorcery that by Mr. Potter's account should be extinct." He looked up. "3 things that should not be in the same room were in the same room tonight. That's not a coincidence. That's an introduction. Someone is building a bridge between a dead wizard and a living hell, and they wanted us to see the first plank of it." "Why show us?" Diana asked. "To measure the response," Hawkgirl said. She had her arms folded, wings tucked tight, and her bluntness had gone grim. "It's what I do. You're planning a war against an unknown power. You poke it once with something small and you watch how it moves. Now they know how we move." Her eyes went to Harry. "Now they know how he moves. They saw it too, whatever was on the far side of that door. They saw him nearly do the cold thing, and they saw what pulled him back. That's data. They'll use it." The room was quiet. Harry sat with his hands flat on the table, the careful flatness he gave everything now, and made himself meet their eyes. "She's right," he said. "I nearly did it. You should all know that because you're trusting me, and trust you don't understand is just luck waiting to run out." He turned the truth over and set it down where they could see it. There was a clean solution that ended 6 lives and closed the door. And for about a second it was the most reasonable thing in the world, and the only reason those men are alive is that Dinah talked to me like I was still a person. That's the deal you're getting with me. That's the whole deal. "I will do everything in my power for you, and my power is enough to frighten the things that frighten Batman, and once in a while one of you is going to have to grab my arm and remind me what I decided to be. I won't resent it. I'll need it. I'd rather say it now than have you find out in the dark." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Diana stood and came around the table and put her hand on his shoulder where Canary's had been and looked down at him with the regal directness that he was learning was simply how she loved people by refusing to flinch from them. "We grab each other's arms," she said. "That is what this is. That is the only thing it has ever been. You think you are confessing a weakness. You are describing the job." She looked around the table at Clark, who nodded at Dinah, who gave him the warmth openly now, at Shaira, who said nothing but unfolded her arms, which from her was a benediction. "You are not a weapon we have to manage, Harry. You are a man who came to a room full of strangers and asked us to help him stay himself. We know how to do that. It is, in the end, all any of us are doing." Later, when the others had gone to their rest and the watchtower had dimmed to its night cycle, Harry stood at the great window with the earth turning below him, and Zatanna found him there, 2 mugs in her hands, and held one out. "Tea," she said. "I checked. It won't survive your grip, but I reinforced the cup with a charm, so you've got about 4 minutes before it gives up. Drink fast." She leaned on the rail beside him, closer than the rail required. "I felt him too. Tonight, through the seam, your dead wizard. You're going to tell me about him, all of it, the prophecy in the forest and the part where you died, because I am one of the few people on this station who can fight the kind of thing he's becoming, and I'd like to not go in blind." She sipped her own tea and watched him over the rim of it, dark eyes amused and entirely serious at once. "But not tonight. Tonight you held a tear in the world shut with your bare hands, and you didn't kill anyone you didn't have to, which for a man with your blood is a small miracle, and small miracles deserve to be sat with. So sit with it. With me. The continent can wait till morning to be saved." Harry held the reinforced cup in both hands, and the tea stayed in it, and the earth turned slow and blue and full of people who would never know his name, and he found that the quiet in his head was not the cold quiet of the fight but a different quiet, a kept company quiet, the kind he had stopped believing he was allowed. "All right," he said, 4 minutes. "Better make them good ones," said Zatanna, and the 2 of them stood at the window over the turning world, and for 4 minutes neither of them saved anything at all. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The quartermaster of the dark 6 weeks of the new life had taught Harry the shape of belonging again, and the shape of it surprised him because it was made mostly of small things. It was the way the Flash had stopped labeling his pudding cups, which Harry understood to be a kind of trust. It was Clark dragging him to a diner in Metropolis on a Tuesday and ordering for both of them and talking about nothing, about wheat prices and a story he was chasing. The deliberate ordinariness of it a gift from one strong man to another. It was the child's drawing in the corridor, which someone had quietly updated to include a dark-haired figure off to one side, smaller than the others, included anyway. Harry had stood in front of that drawing for a while the day it changed, and had said nothing to anyone about it, and had walked a little straighter for the rest of the day. And it was Diana. Most mornings she found him in the training room and put him on the floor and pulled him up again. and somewhere in the third week she had begun to talk while they fought, telling him about her sisters and her island and the long wars of the world he had never been taught, so that the fight became a conversation conducted in bruises. The voice in his blood stayed quiet through all of it. It had nothing to sell to a man who was, against every expectation, beginning to be happy. One night near the end of the 6th week, she did not put him on the floor. They had stopped, both of them breathing hard, and instead of resetting she had crossed to the great window and stood looking at the earth, and Harry had gone to stand beside her because the alternative was to pretend he had somewhere else to be, and he was finished pretending things around Diana. On the Messira, she said, we are taught that strength is a trust, not a possession, a thing held on behalf of those who have less of it. My mother drilled it into me before I could lift a shield. She was quiet a moment. Then I came into the world of men, and I learned that almost no one is taught this, that most of those who are strong believe their strength is simply theirs to spend as they please, and that the few who think otherwise are worn down by the ones who don't, until they either harden or break. She turned to look at him. I had begun to think I was the last person alive who had been taught it, and then a wizard held a train above a river and handed me the last man out and asked for a cup of tea. That's a lot of weight to hang on a cup of tea, Harry said. It is exactly the right amount, Diana said. She did not look away. She never looked away. He had come to understand that this was simply how she loved people, by refusing to flinch from them, and that being looked at by Diana was a thing most people could not bear for long and that he could have borne forever. I want you to understand something, because you say a great many true things about yourself, and I have not yet said a true thing about you to your face, and that is a debt. She stepped closer. You believe you are dangerous, and you are. You believe you must be watched, and you must. But I have stood beside the strongest beings this world has produced, and I have never once felt, standing beside any of them, that they would catch me if I fell. I feel it standing beside you. I do not know what to do with that yet. I am telling you so that you know I am working on it. Harry looked at her, at the regal directness of her, at the honest uncertainty under it that she had chosen to show him on purpose, and he understood that she had just done the same thing he had done in the commissary, had named the dangerous true thing out loud rather than let it ambush them later, and that it was from Diana an act of enormous courage. Take your time, he said. I'm not going anywhere. I'm faster than almost everything now, but I find I'm in no hurry at all. And the way she looked at him then was its own kind of answer, unhurried and certain, and the earth turned beneath them, and neither of them said anything else, because some things were better left exactly as large as they were. Which was, of course, when the work found him again, the way it always did. It found him through Black Canary, who knocked on the frame of his quarters at an hour that was nobody's idea of polite, already in her field gear, her expression set to the particular flatness Harry had learned meant she had been awake all night with something ugly. I need a wizard, Dinah said, specifically. Not a strong man, not a flying brick, no offense, you're a lovely flying brick. A wizard. People are going missing out of Bloodhaven and Gotham, the kind of people nobody files reports for, runaways, addicts, the ones the city's already decided not to count. 43 in 2 months. In the last place 3 of them were seen. There's a smell I can't explain and a feeling in the air that turns my stomach, and the local sensitives won't go near it. And Zatanna's off-world cleaning up something worse. She crossed her arms. You told the room you'd do everything in your power, I'm calling it. I want the man who knows dark magic from the inside, and I want him tonight, and I want him to remember on the way that these 43 are exactly the kind of people the math in your head likes to round down. Harry was already reaching for his coat. That's a low blow, he said. It's an accurate one, Dinah said. I keep a list of those. Get dressed. The trail led them down through Bloodhaven's underside, the parts of the city that existed in the gaps between the parts that got photographed, and Dinah moved through it the way she moved through everything, like she owned the deed to it and was disappointed in the tenants. She did not fly. She did not want to fly. She wanted to be on the ground where the missing had been, talking to the people who had watched them vanish, and Harry walked beside her at human pace and learned, over the course of that long night, a great deal about Dinah Lance. He learned that she had grown up in this work, the second of her name to wear the fishnets and the cry, that her mother had been a hero before her and had died tired, and that Dinah had decided young that the measure of the job was not the gods you fought in the sky, but the people you found in the gutter who nobody else came back for. He learned that the toughness was real and the warmth was realer, that she gave the warmth selectively and on purpose, the way a doctor gives morphine, because she had learned that a frightened person told you the truth faster if they believed you were on their side, and that the terrible thing was that she always was. She showed him how to do it too, not by explaining but by letting him watch. She knelt to the level of the people she questioned. She used their names twice in the first minute. She never once let her eyes drift to the thing she actually wanted, while a person was still telling her the thing they actually needed to say. By the third doorway, Harry had stopped watching the leads and started watching her, and she caught him at it. You're staring, she said, crouched beside a man who slept in a doorway and had seen one of the missing taken. It's distracting, stare at the lead. I'm watching how you do it, Harry said. The talking to people thing, I was never any good at it. People look at me and see the thing that ended the war. You look at people and they see someone who's going to fix their night. Dinah glanced up at him and something flickered behind the flatness, gone before he could name it. That's because I'm not trying to be loved, she said. I'm trying to be useful. The loved part comes later if it comes, and it's nobody's business but mine. She straightened, pressing a folded bill into the sleeping man's hand without making a thing of it. He saw a van, white, no plates, and a man with a cane who didn't walk like he needed one, and he heard the missing girl say a name before they put her in the back. She looked at Harry. She said it like a prayer, like it was supposed to protect her. The name was Riddle. The night went cold around Harry, the specific cold he had hoped never to feel again. Say it again, he said. Riddle, Dinah said, watching his face. It means something to you. It's his name, Harry said, his real one. The one he buried so deep he killed people for knowing it. Tom Riddle. He looked down the dark street toward the docks, where a white van with no plates would be, where a man with a cane he did not need would be, and the cold settled into a clarity that was almost calm. He's not whispering through a hole in the world anymore, Dinah. He's recruiting. He's got people saying his name like a prayer in a city that never heard of him. That's not an echo, that's a church. Somebody's building him one. Then we go burn it down, Dinah said, and there was no fear in her, only the flat readiness of a woman who had burned down worse, and Harry found that her certainty steadied him more than reassurance would have. But we go smart. You call Shayra on the way. If it's what you're afraid it is, I want a third, and I want the one who hits hardest and asks the fewest questions. The church, when they found it, was a flooded subway station 3 levels under the docks, and it was worse than Harry had let himself imagine, and he had imagined a great deal. They went carefully, Dinah on point because she was quieter than he would ever be, Harry behind with his magic gathered and his strength banked, and Hawkgirl above them in the dark of the tunnel ceiling, summoned by a single word into the calm and arriving without question, because Shayra Hall did not own any preamble and did not need to be asked twice when the word was Riddle and 43. She had said one thing only on the descent, dropping in beside him through the dark above the docks, and it was the kind of thing only Shayra would say. You're quiet, she'd observed. The good kind of quiet, or the kind where the blood's talking to you. And when he told her it was the good kind, the working kind, she grunted and said, Tell me if it changes, I don't care how. Say a word, drop a sign, look at me wrong, I'll know. I've watched what your people sound like when the voice wins, and I'd rather hit you early than bury a city late. It was not comfort. Shayra did not deal in comfort. But it had steadied him more than comfort would have, the flat certainty of someone who had decided to watch him and was not going to pretend otherwise, and Harry had carried it down into the dark like a hand on his shoulder. The station had been made into a working. Harry read it the way Dinah read a crime scene, fast and total and sick to his stomach. The missing were there, all 43 of them, alive, which was the cruelty of it, kept alive in a ring around the platform with their eyes filmed gray and their lips moving in the unison chant he had heard in the chemical plant. Anchors, every one of them, their lives being slowly spent to feed the thing taking shape at the center of the ring. And at the center of the ring stood a vat, an apocalyptian vat, its surface crawling with the same circuitry as the fragment on Batman's table, and inside the vat, suspended in fluid the color of arterial blood, half-grown and growing, was a body. It had a face. The face was becoming familiar in the way a developing photograph becomes familiar. The bones surfacing out of the murk, and Harry knew the face, because it had haunted the inside of his skull for the better part of his life. They were growing him a body. They were growing Tom Riddle a new and perfect body out of dark sorcery and apocalyptian science, and they were paying for it with 43 people the city had decided not to count. That's new, murmured a voice, and the man with the cane stepped out from behind the vat, and he was not a Death Eater, and that was the first wrong thing. He was elegant in a way that had nothing to do with Earth, dressed in dark finery that shifted when the light touched it, and he moved with the lazy precision of someone who had killed a very great many people and found it neither difficult nor interesting. An audience. We so rarely get an audience this far down. You must be the contamination. He inclined his head toward Harry with exquisite courtesy. I am Kanto. I serve the will of Apocalypse, which is to say I serve Darkseid, which is to say I am the most dangerous thing you have met, child, and I say that having read the file on what your blood is supposed to become. You're an assassin, Harry said. I've met assassins. They talk less. I am an artist, Kanto said, who occasionally accepts commissions in death. This great working you see before you is a commission. The shade you knew as the Dark Lord came to us, you understand, came crawling through the spaces between worlds, a clever little soul fragment with grand ambitions and no body to enact them. He wished to be reborn. We had the means, a simple transaction. He provides us a foothold in your world's hidden magic, a thing we have long coveted and never possessed, and in exchange we provide him flesh. He smiled, and it was the worst thing in the room, worse than the vat. He believes he is using us. They always believe that. Is the most reliable thing about ambitious men. And what does Darkseid want with a foothold in our magic? Hawkgirl said from the dark above, Mesa light now, the blue fire of it throwing her shadow huge across the flooded walls. Speak plainly, Apocalyptian, I've fought your kind before. The pretty talk is just the knife taking off its coat. Thanagarian, Kanto's eyes lifted to her with something close to affection. How direct, very well, my master collects. Powers, weapons, principles of force. Your world has a kind he has never been able to harvest, the magic that runs in old bloodlines, the kind that answers will instead of physics. He wishes to understand it, to own it. And he has noticed, the eyes came back to Harry, that this world has grown something even rarer. A Viltrumite who can also do the impossible thing, strength and sorcery in one body. You understand what you are, child. You are the only one of your kind that has ever existed or ever will. My master does not want you dead. Dead is wasteful. He wants you delivered. And Harry felt the voice in his blood stir, and for once it was not offering him a temptation. For once it was afraid in its cold, patient way, because the thing Kanto was describing was the one fate the conqueror's instinct understood completely, to be a weapon in a greater hand, to be owned. Do not let them take you, the voice said, and it was the first time it and Harry had ever wanted the same thing, and Harry found that more unsettling than any temptation. Free the anchors, Harry said to Dinah and Shayera very quietly. All 43, I'll take Kanto and the vat. The vat's the priority, Hawkgirl said. Kill the body. Number Harry's voice did not rise. The body's empty. He's not in it yet, he's still a fragment writing the working, and if I smash the vat while the workings live, the backlash goes into the anchors and we lose all 43. The anchors first, always the anchors first. He looked at her. Trust me on the magic, I'll trust you on everything else. A beat, then Hawkgirl dropped out of the dark like a judgment. Fine, she said, but if I'm wrong about you, wizard, I'm taking it out of your skull. And she hit the first knot of Death Eaters guarding the ring before the words had finished. The fight was the worst kind, the kind fought in close quarters around things you could not afford to break, and Harry had fought enough of those to know that the danger was never the enemy in front of you, but the panic that made you forget what you were protecting. The Death Eaters were real, a dozen of them, the loyalists who had found their dead master and new and terrible patron and signed on for the resurrection, and they fought like men who had nothing left to lose and a god promised on the other side of winning. Their curses broke against Harry and did nothing, and that bought the others room. But the augmented muscle Kanto had brought was another matter. Intergang heavies wearing Apocalyptian plate that could take even a Thanagarian mace and answer it. And the platform became a churning press of bodies around a ring of dying people Harry could not let so much as a stray hex touch. So he did the thing he had been building toward since the field behind his cottage. He stopped thinking of himself as a wizard who happened to be strong, or a strong man who happened to know magic, and he let the two halves of himself become one thing, and the result was something the room had no defense against. He cast a shield over the entire ring of anchors, a dome of hardened air, and then he simply walked through the battle holding it in place with a corner of his attention, while the rest of him took the augmented heavies apart with his hands. He learned their armor in the first exchange, the way Diana had taught him to learn an enemy, found the seams where the Apocalyptian plate joined, and after that he did not punch them, because punching them would have killed them, and Dinah's 43 deserved an example of restraint. He took them apart instead, peeling the plate off them with his fingers like a man shucking oysters, and where a heavy raised a gauntlet to fire on the anchors, Harry was simply there first, faster than the trigger, closing the gauntlet in his fist until the weapon died in a shower of dead light. Dinah and Shayera worked the ring, and it was a thing to watch, the two of them. Canary's controlled cries dropped Death Eaters in clean rows, without touching the anchors a foot away. Surgical, her power a scalpel where Harry's was an avalanche. She pitched each note with a precision that told Harry exactly how much of her life had gone into learning to hurt only the people she meant to hurt. And Hawkgirl above broke the working's lesser anchor stones one by one with her mace, methodical under fire, so that the dome of dying minds began slowly to loosen its grip on the 43. They had clearly fought together for years. They did not speak, they did not need to. Harry, fighting at the third point of their triangle, felt the shape of a thing he had not had since the war, the wordless trust of people who had each decided the others were worth dying beside, and he found that he would have held the dome until his arms came off rather than be the one who let them down. He understood, holding it, that this was the thing the war he could not yet see coming would turn on. Not his strength was a given, a flood he had learned to ride. The thing that would decide it was this: the dome held over the helpless, the three of them moving as one around a ring of people who would never know their names, the decision to spend everything protecting instead of spending anything to win. The empire in his blood had no concept for it. The disc had shown him 10,000 years of conquest and not one image of a soldier holding a shield over strangers at cost to himself, because the empire had never once produced such a soldier, because the empire had spent 10,000 years making very sure it never would. Harry held the dome and bled a little holding it and was glad of the cost, because the cost was the proof that he was not the thing his blood wanted him to be. And through it all, Kanto did not fight. He watched. He leaned on his cane that he did not need, and he watched Harry with the appreciation of a connoisseur. And when Harry had taken the last heavy apart and the working had begun to gutter, Kanto applauded softly 3 times. "Magnificent," he said. "You see, this is precisely the problem with you. You fight like that with all of that, and you use it to peel armor instead of crush skulls. Such a waste, such an exquisite, deliberate waste." He stopped leaning on the cane. "My master will so enjoy curing you of it." The working broke. Harry felt it go, felt the dome of gray unison collapse, and the 43 dropped where they stood, freed, their eyes clearing, the chant dying in their throats, alive all of them, and Dinah was already moving among them with the brisk competence of a woman who had pulled people out of worse, checking pulses, murmuring the reassurances that were also commands: "You're safe, you're going home, stay down, breathe." But the breaking of the working did the thing Harry had warned them of, and there was no avoiding it, because the body in the vat had been waiting for exactly this. As the anchor's stolen life cut off, the half-grown thing in the blood-colored fluid did not die. It convulsed. And the fragment that had been riding the working, the soul shard of Tom Riddle that had no body yet but had a great deal of will, poured itself into the unfinished flesh all at once, and the vat shattered, and the thing that climbed out of it was not the perfect body they had been growing but a half-made horror of it, raw and red and wrong, and it stood on the broken platform dripping apocalyptian fluid, and it turned its developing face toward Harry, and it smiled with a mouth that was not finished being a mouth. "Harry," it said, and the voice was wet and forming and unmistakable. "You came, you always come, it is the most predictable thing about you and the most useful." "You're early," Harry said. "You weren't done cooking." "You forced the issue," Riddle said, flexing a hand that was still becoming a hand. "As you always do. No matter, this will serve. It is more than I have had in years." The half-made eyes moved across the platform, across the freed 43, across Dinah and Shaira and back to Harry, and the smile widened. "And it lets me give you the message in person, which I confess I wanted. My new associates are very interested in you. They have shown me things, Harry, out in the dark. They have shown me what comes for this world, and it is not me. I am a small thing. I have made my peace with being a small thing, because the small thing that allies with the storm survives the storm." The voice dropped, intimate, the way it had used to drop inside his skull. "There is a fleet, Harry, your father's people. They are already turning toward this little blue rock, because somewhere in the dark a signal woke that should never have woken, and it has your blood in it. And there is a power on Apocalypse that intends to have you before the fleet arrives, because a Viltrumite who is also a sorcerer is the single most valuable object in this arm of the galaxy, and they are all of them coming for you. I merely intend to be standing close enough to feed on what's left." And the voice in Harry's blood, the cold, patient conqueror's voice, said one word, and the word was, "Now." Harry felt it gather him. He felt the cold, clean certainty rise, the arithmetic assemble, and this time the arithmetic was not about strangers in armor, but about the thing that had murdered his parents and hunted his childhood and now stood half-made and gloating on a broken platform, and the temptation was not to be efficient. The temptation was to enjoy it. To take the thing that had been the architect of every nightmare he owned and unmake it slowly, to let the conqueror in his blood off its leash just this once. Just for this one creature that the entire universe agreed deserved it. And oh, the voice promised, it would feel like justice. It would feel like the most righteous thing he had ever done. His hand was rising. The strength was a flood. The platform's lights flickered with the gathering of it. "Harry," Hawkgirl's voice, not Dinah's this time, blunt and hard and cutting through the cold from close beside him, and when he glanced at her she was not looking at the monster, she was looking at him, gold eyes fierce and unflinching. "I see it, the thing in your blood, it's in your face. Listen to me, because I'm the only one here who's watched what your people become, and I'm telling you, this is the door, right here. This is exactly how it starts, not with conquering a world, with one kill that everybody agrees was deserved. That's the first one. They're all deserved after that. Every single one. You don't get to be the man who decides who's earned it, because the second you take that job, you're not protecting anyone anymore. You're just the strongest thing in the room, doing what the strongest thing in the room always does." Her voice did not soften, because softness was not what she had. So put it down, take him the hard way, prove me wrong about your blood. I have been waiting a long time to be wrong about your blood. Harry held there on the edge of it, the strength gathered and screaming to be used, the monster smiling its half-made smile, and Shayera Hall's fierce, unsoftened faith the only thing in the universe holding the line. He put it down. He took Riddle the hard way, not with the cold flood, but with the old precise magic, the wizard's magic, the banishing and binding he had learned at the side of better people, layered with exactly as much strength as the task required and not 1 ounce more. He did not enjoy it. He made himself not enjoy it, made it work instead of pleasure, and that was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than dying in the forest. Because in the forest he had only had to be brave, and here he had to be restrained, and restraint was a harder country than courage had ever been. The half-made body could not hold against him, not yet, not unfinished. He bound it in light, and he severed the fragment's grip on the borrowed flesh, and the thing that had been Tom Riddle's new body slewed to the platform inert. The soul shard torn loose and shrieking and fleeing back into the dark between the doors, not destroyed, not yet, but homeless again, denied, sent screaming back to its patrons with nothing. And Kanto, who had watched all of it with his connoisseur's appreciation, sighed, the sigh of a man whose evening's entertainment had been spoiled, and produced from the air a small device that Harry recognized too late as a boom tube trigger. "Beautifully done," he said, "truly. You denied him, you spared the 43, you kept the leash on your blood with a Thanagarian whispering in your ear. My master will be fascinated by the recording. He does so love to know precisely where a thing can be broken, and tonight you have shown him a great deal." He thumbed the trigger, and the air behind him tore open into a corridor of fire and elsewhere. "Until we meet under better commission, contamination. Do give my regards to the Amazon. He wants her too, you know. He wants all of them. He finds your little family of strong women quite interesting." And he stepped backward into the fire and was gone, and the boom tube sealed behind him with a sound like the world clearing its throat. They got the 43 out, which took the rest of the night and most of the morning, ambulances and leaguers, and the slow, gentle work of returning the uncounted to a city that would go on not counting them. Harry carried the ones who could not walk 2 and 3 at a time, gentle, so gentle, and not one of them woke with a bruise from his hands. It was nearly dawn when he found himself sitting on a dock piling with Dinah beside him, in the harbor going gray and pink at the edges, both of them too wrung out to fly back yet, and the city's ugly water slapping at the pilings below their boots. "You did the hard thing," Dinah said. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the water. "I watched. Shayera talked you off the ledge and you went the hard way, and it cost you. I could see what it cost." She was quiet a moment. "My mother used to say the job isn't the strength. Anybody can have strength. The world's lousy with it. The job is what you don't do with it." She said that the night before she died, more or less. I didn't understand it for years. She turned then and looked at him, and the flatness was gone, and what was under it was the warmth she gave on purpose, except this time he did not think it was on purpose. "I understand it now, watching you. You're going to spend your whole life on the wrong side of that arithmetic, Harry. Every fight. The cold thing always available, always reasonable, always right there. And you're going to keep choosing the hard way, and it's going to keep costing you, and most people are never going to know you did it." She bumped his shoulder with hers, the ordinary human weight of it, the thing she'd done in the chemical plant. "I'll know, for whatever that's worth. I keep a list of those, too, the things people do when nobody's keeping score. A breath, you're on it, top of it actually, don't let it go to your head." "It's already there," Harry said, "right next to the part that wants to be told." Number Dinah almost smiled, the first one he had seen all night, tired and crooked and real. "Good," she said, "then we'll get along." She stood and stretched and looked at the harbor going gold, and for a moment she let the toughness all the way down, which Harry had learned was a thing she did almost never, and never by accident. "I lied before," she said, not looking at him, "when I said the loved part was nobody's business but mine. It's a little bit your business now. I haven't decided how much, but some." She glanced at him sidelong, the warmth in it no longer on purpose. "Come on, buy a girl breakfast before you carry her home. You owe me. I gave you the low blow and the lead in a speech about my dead mother, and a woman keeps a tab." And they flew up out of the gray harbor into a sky going gold, two people who had kept 43 of the uncounted alive together, and the easy silence between them was a thing neither of them was in any hurry to fill. They brought it all back to the watchtower at midday, and the room that had argued about whether to fear Harry 6 weeks ago now argued about something far worse, because the shape of the enemy had finally surfaced, and the shape of it was every shape at once. Zatanna was back, and that helped in the way her presence always helped, a sharpness that cut through dread. She had come off her own off-world horror straight into the briefing, and she listened to the account of the subway with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. And when Harry described the inverted seam and the homeless fragment, she swore fluently in a language that made the lights flicker. Apocalyptian tech married to your dead wizard sorcery, she said. Do you have any idea how wrong that is? Those are two completely different grammars of the impossible. Someone spent a fortune and a decade making them speak to each other, and they did it for one reason, which is you. She looked at Harry, and the showmanship was gone, only the careful thing under it. I felt the working die from orbit, you know. The whole mystic web shuddered. For about a second I thought it was you that died, and I learned something about myself I'm not going to say out loud in a briefing room. She uncrossed her arms. So let's catch whoever's building these bridges before they build a worse one. I've got a personal stake now, apparently. Batman laid it out without softening any of it, which was the only mercy he knew how to give. We have 3 threats and they are braided together, and that's the part that should frighten you. 1, a fragment of a human dark wizard, ambitious patient, currently homeless but not destroyed. Survivable alone. 2, apocalypse, reaching into our world through Inner Gang and through Kanto, harvesting our magic, building towards something. Survivable barely with the whole league. 3, he looked at Harry. An empire of Viltrumites, turning toward Earth because a signal woke in Mr. Potter's blood that they have apparently been listening for across the void for a very long time. That one we do not survive. Not as we are. I have run it 40 ways. There is no version where this team as it stands repels a Viltrumite fleet. He wants all of them, Harry said quietly. The room turned to him. Kanto, his parting shot. He said Darkseid wants Diana and the others, all of you, the strong women. He found it amusing. I didn't understand it down there in the fight, but I've had all morning and I understand it now. He made himself say the rest because he had promised this room the truth even when it cost him. Darkseid doesn't collect weapons, he collects leverage. He's worked out what every enemy I've ever had eventually works out, which is that you don't break a man like me by hitting him. You break him by threatening the people he'd cross his own line to protect. He's not gathering force to fight me. He's gathering hostages to aim me. He looked around the table at Diana, at Dinah, at Shaira, at all of them. I will not be aimed, but I'd be lying if I said the threat doesn't work. It works. It's the only thing that's ever worked. The room was silent. Then Diana stood in the way she stood when she was about to make something true by saying it, and her voice was level and regal and left no room at all for argument. Then let us be very clear about something so that no enemy ever mistakes it. She set her hands flat on the table. We are not hostages. We are not leverage. We are the Justice League, and 3 of us in this room have already chosen to stand between Harry Potter and the dark, and we did not choose it because he is strong. We chose it because he is good, and because good is rarer than strong, and because the universe has produced exactly one being who is both, and we do not intend to let it be taken. She looked at Harry, and the directness of it pinned him to his chair more surely than her lasso ever had. Darkseid believes we are your weakness. He has made the oldest mistake the strong make. He has confused the thing a man loves with the thing that makes him weak. A beat. We are not your weakness, Harry. We are the reason your blood has never won an argument. We are why you are still you. And when they come, all of them, the fragment and the empire and the god of tyrants, they are going to learn what every conqueror eventually learns, which is that there is nothing in this universe more dangerous than people who have decided freely that they will not be moved. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Shaira from the back of the room, arms folded, said in her blunt flat way the thing that was somehow the most moving of all. I've fought for a lot of causes. Most of them turned out to be empires wearing nicer words. She unfolded her arms. This is the first one I've believed in since Thanagar broke my heart. Don't make me regret it, wizard. And from Shaira Hall, that was a vow, and the whole room knew it. Harry did not have words for what the room had just given him, so he did not reach for any. He had spent a childhood being protected by people who died doing it, and he had built the whole of his adult life around making sure no one else ever had to. And here was a table of the most formidable beings on the planet calmly informing him that they had no intention of letting him carry it alone. The voice in his blood had nothing to say to that. It had never once encountered a thing it could not turn into leverage, and it had just met 4 of them, sitting around a table, refusing on his behalf to be afraid. For the length of a breath he let himself simply be held by it, the way you let yourself be held by warmth after a long time in the cold. And then he rose because there was work, and because standing up was the only thanks any of them would have accepted. Far out in the dark between the worlds, a homeless fragment screamed its way back to its patrons, with the worst news a small ambitious thing could carry. That the contamination could not be tempted into being what its blood was built to be, that it could not be aimed at the ones it loved, and that the powers gathering for it would have to come and take it, and that when they came they would have to come through everyone who had begun, against all sense, and freely to love it back. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The Snake and the Star in a fortress of black basalt on a world that orbited a dying star. Three powers bargained over a man who was not in the room. The fragment that had been Tom Riddle had no body, and so it spoke through the device Desaad had built for it, a column of cold light that shaped his old hateful voice out of nothing. He had grown accustomed to having no body. He had decided with the cold flexibility that had always been his single virtue that having no body made him harder to kill and that he could afford to be patient where flesh could not. "You promised me a vessel," the light said. "The wizard denied me the last one. You will give me another." "I will give you something better," said Kanto, who lounged in the basalt hall with his cane across his knees and watched the dying star through a window the size of a cathedral. "A vessel grown not from your degraded sorcery alone but laced through with my master's gifts, strength, speed, durability enough to stand against the contamination for longer than a heartbeat. You will not merely have a body, little shade. You will have a body that can fight him." He smiled. "On one condition. Name it. You lose." Kanto turned from the window. "Oh, you may try to win, of course. You may even believe you can, but the purpose of the exercise is not your victory. The purpose is to put Harry Potter in a place where he must choose, in the same instant between stopping a slaughter and stopping his own capture, and to watch which he chooses, and to take from him whichever he does not. My master does not need you to kill the wizard. He needs you to corner him, be the wall he runs into. After that, your usefulness and your debt are both discharged, and you may go back to being a clever little nothing in the dark, and we will never speak again." The cold light was silent for a long moment. Then it laughed, the high mirthless sound that had emptied schoolrooms once. "You think I will object to being used as bait," Riddle said, "because you think I have pride. I buried my pride the night I learned I could not die. I will be your wall. I will be the most terrible wall the boy has ever run into, and if in the running he gives me an opening, I will take his head, and you may explain to your master why his prize came back in 2 pieces. The light pulsed. "Grow me my body. I have a slaughter to arrange." The boy is sentimental about crowds. I have always found his sentiments so very easy to spend. The slaughter was arranged for a Saturday, and it was arranged in 3 places at once, which was the cruelty and the genius of it. The alert hit the watchtower in a single ugly cascade. A packed football stadium in Manchester, 90,000 people, where the gates had sealed themselves shut by sorcery and a green fog had begun to rise from the pitch. A hospital in Gotham, where every life support system had failed in the same second and a dark mark had burned itself into the sky above the building. And the Thames Embankment in London at the height of a festival, 250,000 people pinned against the water by a wall of conjured fire that was walking toward them at the pace of a man strolling. 3 targets, each one a mass grave waiting to happen. And threaded through all 3, on every frequency the League monitored and several it did not, a single voice, the high cold voice speaking to one man. "Hello, Harry," Voldemort said to the whole turning world. "I have a body again. It is a remarkable body. You will see. I have arranged 3 gifts for you in 3 cities, and you cannot reach all of them in time, not even you, not even with all your borrowed friends, so you will have to choose. You were always so good at choosing, weren't you? The diadem or the boy, the hallows or the living. You have a gift for arithmetic you pretend to hate. Let us see it. Choose and let me watch you live with it, the way you have made me live with everything." In the Watchtower's command center, the League moved with the speed of long practice, and Batman was already assigning Superman to Manchester, Flash to Gotham, Green Lanterns ring-webbing the London fire, the whole apparatus of the world's defense unfolding in seconds. But Harry stood very still in the center of it, and he was not panicking, and the not panicking was the thing that made Diana turn to look at him, because she knew the difference between a man frozen by fear and a man who had simply stepped outside the trap to look at it from the side. "He's built it wrong," Harry said. "Explain," Batman said, not looking up. "He's thinking like a wizard who's afraid of me," Harry said. "He's built a problem that can't be solved by one person who can only be in one place. But I'm not one person who can only be in one place, and more to the point, I'm not alone, which is the variable he keeps refusing to account for, because being alone is the only way he's ever understood the world." He was already moving toward the teleporter, and the words came fast and clean. The cold clarity of the fight turned for once entirely toward arithmetic instead of killing. Superman, Manchester. "The fog's a poison working, magical. You can't punch it, but you can vent that stadium to the upper atmosphere if you make a controlled updraft with the roof. Lift the roof, don't tear it. The fog rises and disperses. 90,000 people get a fright and a story. Flash, Gotham, the life supports a curse, not a system failure. You can't fix a curse, but you can be every crash cart in that building at once for as long as it takes Zatanna to break the working remotely. So you keep them alive with your hands and she does the magic down the comm. John London, you already know, cage the fire, then starve it. A ring constructs airtight, smother it block by block. Dinah and Shayra, you're with the crowds, all three sites, crowd control and triage, because saving people from dying is only half the job and the other half is keeping 250,000 terrified humans from trampling each other, which is a thing the strong always forget and you two never do. He stopped at the teleporter pad. The room had gone quiet around the speed of it. And you? Diana said. Me he wants in the 4th place, Harry said. The one he didn't announce. 3 slaughters are the bait. Somewhere there's a 4th site empty of people where the wall is waiting, because Kanto built this and Kanto told me himself he wants me cornered, not dead. So I'm going to go and let myself be cornered on purpose with my eyes open, while the rest of you make his 3 slaughters into 3 rescues and prove to him that his whole theory of me is wrong. He looked at Diana. He thinks my friends are my weakness. He built this entire thing on it. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes letting the most dangerous people on this planet make the stupidest mistake he ever made. You're walking into the trap alone, Diana said. It was not quite an objection, it was a demand for a reason. I'm walking into it knowing it's a trap, which is not the same as alone, Harry said. Trust me on the magic. I'll trust you on the 90,000. And the way she looked at him then was not fear. It was the look of a general releasing a soldier she trusted into the worst of it, and she gave him a single nod, and the team scattered to 3 cities, and Harry stepped onto the pad and went to find the wall. On the Thames embankment, 250,000 people were learning what it felt like to be herded toward water by a wall of fire that thought. It was the festival crowd that made it lethal, not the flames. Green Lantern had the fire caged within 90 seconds. A vast green vault clamping down over the conjured blaze and starving it block by block, and that should have been the end of the danger. It was not, because 250,000 terrified human beings pinned against a river will kill more of themselves in a stampede than any fire, and the strong always forgot this. And the 2 women who dropped into the crush at the embankment's worst pinch point had built their lives on never forgetting it. Channel them, Black Canary said, already moving, her voice pitched to Carrie without panic, the trained calm of a woman who had talked crowds down before. Don't stop them, you can't stop a crowd, you steer it. Shayra, take the high side, give them a sky to look at that isn't on fire, people follow what they can see. Hawkgirl went up in a beat of wings and a blaze of nth metal mace, and she did the thing that should not have worked and did. She made herself a landmark. She hung above the crush, lit and unmistakable, and she bellowed in a voice that had commanded Thanagarian shock troops. This way, eyes on Emmy. Walk, don't run, the fire is caged, walk, and 250,000 frightened animals heard a thing that sounded like it knew what it was doing, and the front of the stampede hitched and bent, and began to flow the way she pointed instead of the way it had been crushing. On the ground, Dinah worked the pinch point itself, the place where the railings had begun to bow under the weight of bodies, and she did the ugly close work that no one would ever film. She pulled a fallen woman up before the crowd could trample her, put a child on a stranger's shoulders and made the stranger responsible with 2 words and a look. Found the old man going down against the railing and braced him with her own body, while she screamed a clear channel open with a controlled cry that knocked exactly the 6 people who needed knocking off their feet and not one more. She had spent 30 years learning to hurt only the people she meant to hurt, and tonight every note of it was mercy. Canary, the railing's going, Hawkgirl called from above. I know, buy me 20 seconds. Dinah set her feet, and Shayra understood, and dropped into the gap with her wings flared wide as a wall, a living barrier of armor and feathers, that the crowd flinched from and flowed around. And in the 20 seconds it bought, Dinah got the last of the pinned clear of the bowing railing before it tore loose and fell into the dark water where bodies would have been. When it was over, when the green vault had smothered the last of the fire, and the embankment had drained itself of its 250,000 without a single death by water or fire or trampling, the 2 of them stood in the wreck of the festival, breathing hard, soaked to the knees, and Hawkgirl looked at the empty railing where so many people should have died and did not, and said in her flat, blunt way, he thought the wizard would have to choose. She spat into the river. He never even counted us. That's the part that gets me. He built a trap for a man and forgot the man has friends and the friends do this for a living. She looked at Dinah. I almost feel insulted. Don't, Dinah said, wringing river water out of her hair. Being underestimated is the best weapon either of us has ever had. Let them keep doing it. We'll keep emptying their traps. She managed a tired grin. 250,000, Shayra, not one funeral my mother would have liked tonight. She raised you to do this. She raised me to be useful, Dinah said. The loved part came later. And the 2 of them stood in the drowned festival a moment longer, the kind of silence that holds between people who have just kept a city alive together, before the comms crackled and the work called them on. The 4th site was a decommissioned power station on the Kent marshes, vast and empty and ringed with wards that flared as Harry came down through the broken roof. Wards designed not to keep him out but to keep him in, to seal the cornering once it began. He let them. He landed on the cracked concrete of the turbine hall, and across the hall under the dead machines, the thing that had been Tom Riddle was waiting for him, and it had a body again, and the body was wrong in a new way. It was tall and pale and perfect, the snake features gone, restored to the handsome shape Riddle had worn before he traded his soul for pieces. But it moved with a weight no human body had, and the apocalyptic fire showed under its skin in seams of dull red, and when it raised a hand the strength that gathered there bent the air. They had built him well. They had built him a body that could fight a Viltrumite for a little while, and Harry understood that the little while was the whole point, that he was meant to be held here occupied while somewhere a count ran down. You came alone, Voldemort said, and there was triumph in it. After everything, after all your friends, you came to me alone. You never could learn, Harry. You always come to the dark by yourself, because in your secret heart you believe the dark is yours, that it is your responsibility, that no one else should have to touch it. It is the most useful thing about you. It always has been. I came alone, Harry agreed, because I trust the others to do their jobs without me standing over them. That's not the same thing you think it is. It never was. You've spent your whole existence not understanding the difference between being alone and being trusted, and it's going to cost you the same way it's cost you everything else. Brave words. Let us see the man behind them. And Voldemort came across the turbine hall faster than any wizard had ever moved, fast enough that an ordinary man would have died in the first instant, and the body apocalypse had built him hit Harry with the force of a falling building. It was a real fight. Harry gave it that much afterward in the privacy of his own assessment. For the first time since the power woke, something on the ground could make him work. The augmented body was strong, genuinely strong, and it had Riddle's centuries of magical cunning driving it, and the combination came at Harry from two directions at once. The fist and the curse, the body and the will, so that he could not simply trade blows because the blows were laced with sorcery designed to find the gaps in a Viltrumite's invulnerability, and he could not simply outmagic it because the body would close the distance and break him while he cast. So Harry fought the way Diana had taught him, which was to say he fought with his whole self at once and stopped pretending the halves were separate. He took a blow that cratered the concrete floor and rolled it into a throw that put Voldemort through a dead turbine. And before the debris had finished falling, he had woven a binding into the air where the body would land, and Voldemort tore through the binding, but the tearing cost him half a second, and Harry had learned from Dinah that half a second was a lifetime if you knew what to spend it on. The voice in his blood was screaming now, but for the first time it was not tempting him. It was simply present, a roar of capability, and Harry found that he could use it without obeying it, could draw on the cold flood of strength while keeping his own hand on the throttle, and the discovery was the thing the whole long apprenticeship of bruises and warnings had been building toward. He was not a man fighting the thing in his blood. He was a man riding it. There was a difference, and he found it in the turbine hall with Tom Riddle's perfect borrowed body trying to kill him, and once he found it, the fight changed. He gave the body its due. It was the hardest thing Earth had ever put in front of him, and it fought with a hatred that had had decades to refine itself. And twice it found the gaps that apocalyptic sorcery had been built to find. A curse that slid past his invulnerability and laid a line of fire across his ribs. A blow that he actually felt the first honest pain since the war. He let the pain teach him. He stopped giving the body the angles it had been built to exploit, changed the rhythm, made the duel a thing of his choosing instead of Kanto's design. The augmented strength came at him and he turned it, the way Diana turned his, used the body's own momentum to drive it through dead machinery, and where Riddle reached for a working that would have collapsed the turbine hall on a city's worth of imaginary hostages. Harry was simply there first, faster than the casting, his hand closing over Riddle's wrist and holding it still with a gentleness that was its own kind of insult. He stopped reacting. He started conducting. He let Voldemort come, and he read the body the way he had read the augmented heavies, found the seams where the apocalyptic power joined the dark sorcery, and he understood with the cold clarity that was his now to use instead of be used by, that the body was a marriage of two things that did not love each other, the fire and the curse held together by Riddle's will alone, and that you broke a thing by its spine, and the spine of this thing was Riddle's belief that he could not lose. So Harry made him lose. Not all at once. He took the body apart the way he had wanted to take it apart in the subway, except now he did it cold and clean and without the slightest pleasure, which was the only way he was willing to do it, and each blow was exactly as hard as the task required and not 1 ounce harder, and with each one the seam between the fire and the curse widened, and Riddle's will strained to hold his stolen perfection together, and could not. You are enjoying this, Voldemort spat through a mouth that was beginning to come apart at the corners, the apocalyptic fire guttering in the seams. No, Harry said, that's the thing you'll never understand. I could be, it's right there. There's a version of me that's enjoying this so much it would frighten you, and he's in my blood and he's begging me to let him out because you of all the things in the universe have earned it. He drove the body to its knees with a blow that did not break bone because he chose for it not to. But I'm not him. I decided not to be him. That's the whole difference between us, Tom. You let the thing in you drive. I don't. And it turns out the man holding the leash is stronger than the thing on the end of it, every single time, which is the one lesson you were never able to learn, because you never once tried to hold a leash in your life. He could have ended it with his hands. The voice begged him to end it with his hands. Instead, Harry did the thing he had come to do, the thing that the whole architecture of the night, Kanto's trap and Riddle's hunger and the augmented body had failed to account for because they had all been thinking about strength and Harry had spent 6 weeks remembering that he was also a wizard. He had been working as he fought, not just fighting. Working. Tracing, with the part of his attention the cold flood freed up, the structure of the thing in front of him, because a body grown to house a soul fragment was a kind of vessel, and a vessel could be unmade, and Harry knew more about the unmaking of Tom Riddle's vessels than anyone alive. Because he had spent a year of his youth hunting Horcruxes, and he had carried one inside his own scar, and he knew in his bones and his magic both, exactly what the death of Tom Riddle required. It required that there be nowhere left to flee. The fragment had survived every defeat by fleeing, by having somewhere to go, another anchor, another door, the dark between the worlds. So Harry did not attack the body. He sealed the room. The wards Kanto had set to corner Harry. Harry turned. It was the kind of magic that should not have been possible, the seizing of another sorcerer's working in the middle of a fight, and it was possible only because Harry had the Viltrumite endurance to hold a duel and a ritual in his 2 hands at once, and the wizard's training to know what to do with the second hand. He took the cornering wards and he inverted them, made the seal that had been meant to trap him into a seal that trapped the thing in front of him. A sphere with no door, no anchor, no dark between the worlds to flee into, and Tom Riddle, for the first time in his long, hateful existence, had nowhere to go. What? Voldemort said, and there was a thing in his voice that had never been in it before. In all the years Harry had known the sound of it. What have you done? I've closed the door, Harry said. All of them, every door you've ever run through. You spent your whole life making sure you'd always have somewhere to flee, and you built it so well that you never learned the one thing everyone else learns, which is how to stand still and lose with whatever grace you've got. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry for you. But I'm sorry that this is the only mercy I've got left to give after everything, and the mercy is that it'll be quick. And then Harry did the last thing, and he did it with the wizard's magic and not the conqueror's strength, because it mattered to him. It mattered more than he could have explained, that the thing which finally ended Tom Riddle was the love-rooted, choice-rooted, hard-won human magic and not the cold inheritance in his blood. He spoke the unmaking. He poured into the sealed sphere the counter to everything Riddle was, the patient cleansing he had used on the possessed men made total and final and inescapable, and the soul fragment in its perfect borrowed body had nowhere to flee and nothing to anchor to and no door left in all the world, and it came apart. It did not scream. That surprised Harry after. At the very end, with nowhere left to run and nothing left to be, the thing that had been Tom Riddle simply looked at him, and for one instant the perfect face was just a face, a boy's face, the orphan he had been before he decided to be a horror, and then it was gone, unmade, scattered, ended, this time with no fragment fleeing into the dark, this time for good and all and forever. The turbine hall was silent. Harry stood alone in it, the inverted wards dissolving around him, and he found that he was shaking, and that he was not glad exactly, but that a weight he had carried since he was a year old had finally, quietly, set itself down. It's done, he said into the calm, and his voice came out steady. He's gone, for real this time, there's no fragment, I made sure. A breath, the city, Manchester's clear, Superman's voice came back warm with relief. 90,000 people got the fright of their lives and not a single funeral. Gotham holding, Flash breathless. Z broke the curse 20 seconds ago. Everybody's breathing. I'm gonna sleep for a week. London's wet but alive. Green Lantern. Fire's out. Canary and Hawkgirl kept the crowd from doing the dying the fire didn't manage. 250,000 people, all of them going home. Harry closed his eyes in the empty turbine hall and let it land. The size of it, 3 cities and a ghost and not one funeral. And understood that Tom Riddle had built his last trap on a theory of Harry Potter that had been wrong for years, and that the wrongness of it had just saved the better part of 500,000 lives. He thought you were my weakness, Harry said to the team, to all of them on the open channel. He bet everything on it. Thank you for being the thing that proved him wrong. Clark found him in the turbine hall an hour later, having tracked him by the one heartbeat on Earth that sounded like his own, and he did not say anything at first. He simply came and stood beside Harry in the place where the thing had ended. 2 strong men in an empty ruin, and let the silence be what it was. The first one I lost, Clark said eventually, not looking at him. I carried it for years. Convinced myself that if I'd been a half-second faster, an inch stronger. It took me a long time to understand the math doesn't work that way, that the job isn't being fast enough to save everyone, it's being the kind of person who keeps showing up to try. He turned. Finally, you saved them all tonight, 3 cities, and I can see on your face you're already hunting for the one you think you should have done better by. There isn't one. Sit with that. You're allowed to have done it right. He put a hand on Harry's shoulder, the careful weight of it. Come back up when you're ready, not before. The dead keep, that's the one mercy they've got. I will, Harry said. I made a promise I'd come and tell them how it went. Figured I'd start practicing on the empty room. And Clark, who understood about the dead and the promises you make them, nodded and left him to it, rising soundless through the broken roof, one strong man trusting another to find his own way back up. It was Diana who said the thing out loud, 3 nights later, because of course it was Diana, who named the dangerous true things rather than let them ambush anyone. The 4 of them were in the Watchtower's quiet observation deck at the end of the night cycle, which had become, without anyone deciding it, a place they ended up. Harry had not engineered it. He would have sworn that under any oath. But the pattern had built itself over the weeks, Diana and Dinah and Shara and Zatanna and Harry, drawn to the same window over the turning world, until the gathering had become a thing with its own gravity, and the gravity had a name none of them had been willing to say. Diana said it. You should speak plainly, she said in the regal level voice that made rooms settle, because we are none of us cowards, and because Kanto said a thing in that subway that has been sitting in this room unspoken ever since, and unspoken things rot. She looked around the circle of them at Dinah leaning against the rail, at Shara with her wings folded and her arms crossed, at Zatanna sitting cross-legged on the deck with her chin on her hand, at Harry. He said Darkseid wants all of us, the strong women. He found it amusing. And the reason he found it amusing is that it is true, that there is a thing between the 5 of us that we have all felt and none of us has named, and the enemy named it before we did, and I will not be a woman who lets her enemy understand her heart better than she does. She held Harry's eyes. I have feelings for you. I have had them since the bridge. I am not ashamed of them and I am not confused by them, and I am too old to pretend otherwise to spare anyone's comfort, least of all my own. The deck was very quiet. Harry, who had faced down a dark lord and a god's assassin and the voice in his own blood, found that this was somehow harder, and he did not look away, because looking away would have been a lie, and he was finished with lies around these 4. I'm not going to pretend I haven't felt it, he said carefully, from all of you. And toward all of you, which is the part I don't have a map for, because I was raised by people who'd have called it a great many ugly things, and because it should feel like it ought to be a competition, and it doesn't, it never has, and I keep waiting to feel like I'm doing something wrong, and instead I just feel. He stopped. I just feel less alone than I have since I was 11 years old. And I don't know what to do with that, except to be honest about it and let the 4 of you decide what it is. Because the one thing I will not do, the one thing my whole life and my whole blood have taught me never to do, is decide it for you. There it is, Zatanna said softly, and there was no mockery in it now, only the careful tenderness she hid under the showmanship. He won't decide for us, of course he won't. It's the whole reason, isn't it? It's the thing that makes him safe to want. She unfolded from the deck and stood. I felt you from orbit, wizard. The whole hemisphere sat up. And the thing nobody understood, the thing I've only just worked out, is that the bell note wasn't the power. The power rings ugly. The bell note was the restraint. You're the strongest thing on this rock, and you spend every waking second choosing to be gentle with it, and that is the single most attractive thing I have ever felt, and I have met actual love gods. She tilted her head. I'm in for whatever this is. I've never wanted the ordinary kind anyway. The ordinary kind bores me by Tuesday. I don't share well, Shara said bluntly into the quiet, and every eye turned to her, and she held her ground the way she held everything, flat and fierce and honest. That's the truth. I'm Thanagarian, I'm territorial, I was raised in a warrior culture that doesn't do this. So I'm not going to stand here and pretend I understand it, or that it's easy, or that I won't get angry sometimes in ways I'll have to work through. She uncrossed her arms. But I've watched this man choose the hard thing every single time the easy thing was right there. And I've watched the 4 of us become something I didn't have words for. And I decided a while ago that I'd rather do a hard thing I believe in than an easy thing I don't. I'm in 2. And if any of you tells me I went soft, I'll deny it and then I'll hit you. Dinah laughed low and warm, the first easy sound any of them had made. Nobody thinks you went soft, Shara. She pushed off the rail and looked at Harry, and the warmth was there, the warmth she gave on purpose, except this was not on purpose. This was just Dinah finally. I keep a list, she said, of the things people do when nobody's keeping score. You're at the top of it. I told you that on a dock at dawn, and I meant it more than I let on. She crossed to him. I've buried people I loved in this life, my mother, others. I told myself I was done, that loving someone in this work was just signing up for the funeral early. And then you held a tear in the world shut with your bare hands and didn't kill anyone you didn't have to, and I stopped being able to tell myself that story. She stopped in front of him. So yes, plainly, whatever the 4 of us have decided to be, count me in it. And Diana, who had started it, finished it, stepping into the circle so that the five of them stood close in the dim light over the turning earth. Then it is said, she declared, and the rod is out of it, and we are not Darkseid's amusement, and we are not your weakness, and we are not anything that any enemy will ever understand, because they think in conquest and we have chosen something they have no word for. She put her hand briefly against the side of Harry's face, the touch of a woman who had killed gods and chose with those same hands to be gentle. We chose this, freely, all of us. Remember that in the dark days that are coming, when the Empire and the God of Tyrants try to tell you we are chains around your neck. We are not your chains, Harry. We are the four people in this universe who looked at the most dangerous being alive and decided of our own free will to stand beside him and to love him and to tell him no when he needs it. There is no power in any sky that can take that from you because no one gave it to you. You did not conquer it, we gave it, and what is given freely cannot be stolen. What happened after the deck dimming to its lowest cycle and the earth turning slow and blue and indifferent below them, belonged to the five of them and to no enemy and no record, and it was warm and it was chosen and it was theirs. He had not told the others he was going back. They would have come with him, all four of them, and he had wanted for 1 hour to stand alone with the silence where the oldest fear of his life had finally stopped. It was strange to be without the weight of Voldemort. He had carried the man since before he could remember carrying anything, a presence at the edge of every good thing, and now there was simply an absence where the presence had been, and Harry stood in it and waited to feel triumphant and felt instead only quiet, and then a slow, unfamiliar thing he eventually identified as peace. He had ended it without becoming the thing his blood wanted him to be. He had closed every door and still chosen the human magic for the last of it. His father would have understood. Be good, the letter had said. It is harder than being strong. He had managed both tonight in a dead power station on a marsh with no one watching, which was the only way that counted. The herald came down out of the sky over the Kent marshes at dawn, while Harry was still there, having gone back to stand in the turbine hall where Tom Riddle had ended, because some endings asked to be sat with. He felt it before he saw it, the way he now felt all such things, a body falling out of orbit that did not move the way bodies were supposed to, a gravity that matched his own. It came down slow and deliberate, with no fear in the descent of something that had never in its long existence had cause to be afraid, and it landed on the cracked concrete of the marsh 40 feet from him, and it was shaped like a man, and it was not one. It was tall and broad and ageless, with a mustache and a heavy brow and eyes that had watched World's End and found the watching unremarkable, and it wore the white and red of an empire older than Harry's whole civilization. And it looked at him with the patient, weighing, gardener's regard that Harry had seen once before, in a vision in a vault, the first morning of his new life. Blood of Viltrum, the herald said in the language Harry knew in his bones and had never been taught. I felt your signal across 40 light years. I have come a long way to see the impossible thing for myself. Its weighing eyes moved over him unhurried, total. A deserter's get thinned across 8 generations, woken at last and carrying the local sorcery in the same body. The Grand Regent did not believe the report. He sent me to confirm it before he sends the fleet. A pause and something that was almost respect and was therefore worse than any threat. You are real, you are everything the report claimed. And so I am obliged to tell you what we tell every world worth the telling. The herald's voice did not change at all. Viltrum is coming, you may join us and be raised to what your blood was meant for. Or you may refuse and be corrected, you and everything you have made the mistake of loving. You have until the fleet arrives to decide. It will not be long, I have already sent the signal home. Harry did not answer it. There was nothing to say to a thing that had announced the end of his world in the same tone it might use to remark on the weather, and he had learned, somewhere in the long year, that silence was sometimes the only dignity a man could keep in front of the immense. He stood in the turbine hall and let the herald rise, and he turned the warning over in the cold, clear part of himself, the part that had stopped being able to panic. A fleet, his father's people, coming for the contamination and everything it had made the mistake of loving. He found examining the thing that he was not afraid, which surprised him, and then understood why he was not afraid, which surprised him more. He had spent the night proving that the Empire's whole theory of him was wrong, that he could not be cornered by threats to the people he loved, that those people were not his weakness, but the precise reason his blood had never won an argument. The fleet would arrive believing the old theory. They would arrive expecting to break him the way every enemy expected to break him. And they would find, the way Voldemort had found in 3 cities, that they had built their entire war on a misunderstanding of what love does in the hand of someone strong enough to protect it. And it rose, unhurried, back into the brightening sky, leaving Harry alone in the turbine hall where one war had ended and a far larger one had just, quietly in the language of his own blood, declared itself. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, The Offer. They had 11 days, by Batman's calculation, between the Herald's departure and the earliest the fleet could arrive, and Harry spent them learning how much of himself he had been holding back. He had thought he understood his own strength. He had measured it in a field behind a cottage, had learned its throttle, had built the habits of gentleness that kept the people around him alive. What he had not done, not once, in all the months since the power woke, was find the top of it, because finding the top of it meant letting go of the leash, and letting go of the leash was the one thing he had organized his entire new life around never doing. The rest of the world prepared in its own ways, most of them invisible to the people being protected. Batman did not sleep for the better part of the 11 days. He built contingencies the way other men breathed, evacuation corridors and orbital defenses, and a dozen plans that all began with the assumption that the League would lose the opening exchange and need somewhere to fall back to. He briefed Harry on none of the comforting ones. A Viltrumite fleet has never been repelled by a planet, he said flatly on the second day, the holographic models of failure turning between them. Not once in the recorded history of 3 spacefaring civilizations. The ones that survived did so by being judged worthless and passed over. We do not have that option because of you, so we are attempting a thing that has no precedent against an enemy that has never lost with a margin of error of 0. He had looked up then, and the cowl had hidden everything except the certainty. I have run it 10,000 times. There is exactly one variable the models cannot price, and it is you, and it is the women, and it is whatever the 5 of you have become that the Empire has no equation for. That is the entire plan, Potter. You are the entire plan. I find that I am, against all my instincts, comfortable with it. It was from Batman the most extravagant statement of faith Harry had ever received, and he carried it through the rest of the 11 days like a stone warmed in the hand. Now he had to. Shara made him see it in her blunt way on the 3rd day, standing at the edge of the asteroid range the League used for the things too large to do near anything breakable. You've been training to hold back, she said. Smart, for living among people you could break, useless for what's coming. A Viltrumite officer has spent 400 years finding the top of his strength and living there. You've spent 400 days learning to stay off yours. If you meet one the way you are now, holding the leash, being careful, he will kill you in the time it takes you to remember you're allowed to let go. She hefted her mace. So, we find your top, today, and I'm going to hit you until we do, because I'm the only one here besides Diana who can take it, and Diana's too gentle with you, and you need someone who isn't. It took 2 days. 2 days of Shara and Diana pushing him past every ceiling he had built for himself. 2 days of Harry letting the cold flood rise higher than he had ever permitted, feeling the conqueror's strength uncoil to lengths that frightened him, and learning slowly, agonizingly, the thing that mattered most, that he could go all the way to the top of himself and still be the one holding the throttle. The leash did not have to mean staying weak. That had been his mistake, the fear underneath all the careful months. He had believed that the only way to stay good was to stay small. And the Empire was about to teach him, the hard way, that the world needed him to be enormous and good at once, and that this was harder than either alone, and that he could do it. Zatanna took the nights, while Shara and Diana took the days. She did not train his body, she trained the seam where his magic met his blood, the place no one else could even perceive. She sat him down in her warded workshop and made him cast at the very top of his strength over and over, until the 2 halves of him learned to move as one thing under load, until he could hold a duel and a working in his 2 hands without either slipping. The Empire's never fought a sorcerer, she told him, tracing the seam with her clever fingers, the candles leaning toward the bright wrongness of him. 400 years of officers, and not one of them has ever had a cursed land that didn't come from a fist. You're going to put things in their sky they don't have a word for, and the not having a word is half the weapon. A Viltrumite can adapt to anything he understands, so we give him things he can't. She had grinned at him then, dark eyes bright. I've waited my whole life for an enemy worth my best material. Don't you dare make me waste it by losing. On the 5th night, Diana found him floating above the asteroids, looking out at the dark the fleet would come from, and she floated up beside him and said nothing for a while, which from Diana was its own kind of speech. I'm afraid, Harry said finally, and it was the one named fear he would allow himself, said once plainly to the one person who would not make it smaller than it was. Not of dying. I died once, it's overrated. I'm afraid that to beat them, I'll have to become enough like them, that the difference stops mattering. That the only way to save everyone is to be the thing the disc has been telling me to be all along, and that I'll win and look around and find I've become exactly what I was fighting. Diana was quiet a moment. On my island, she said, we have a saying about the sword that it does not matter how sharp the blade is. It matters whose hand it is in and what is in the heart of the hand. She turned to look at him, the regal directness gentled by the dark. You will become enormous, Harry. You already are. The question the Empire cannot answer, the question that has never once occurred to them in 10,000 years, is the only question that matters, and it is not how strong. It is in service of what? They are the sharpest blade the galaxy ever forged, and there is nothing in the hand, and that is why, for all their strength, they have never built a single thing worth keeping. You will be sharper than they are before this is done, and there will be something in the hand. She took that hand in the dark above the asteroids. We will be in the hand, that is what we are for. He went to the disc on the 6th night because there was a thing he needed from it, and asking the disc for help was a door he had kept shut for months, and the war had run him out of the luxury of keeping doors shut. He set it on the table in his quarters, and he did the thing he had refused to do since the vault. He opened himself to it on purpose. Voss, he said, into the bones of his own skull, into the patient cold presence that lived in the metal, the one who fell, the one whose blood I carry. Show me the truth of him, not the family story, the real one. I'm about to fight his empire, and I want to know what he was. For a long moment the disc was silent, and Harry thought it might refuse, the way it had sulked when he denied it. Then it warmed, and the lines burned their arterial red, and it showed him. It showed him a Viltrumite officer, 400 years before the family story began, sent to evaluate a small wet world on the edge of the Empire's reach. It showed him the man Voss had been, hard and cert, and exactly like Corvale, a gardener with 9 ended worlds behind him. And then it showed Harry the thing the family story had never known, the thing Voss had buried so deep that even the disc had been forbidden to speak it until its blood had wakened and asked. It showed him the woman. A Peveril daughter, ordinary mortal, who had nursed a wounded, star-fallen thing back to health, not knowing what he was, who had argued with him about mercy across a winter, who had refused, simply and stubbornly and without any power at all, to believe that strength was the only argument that mattered. It showed Harry the slow turning of Voss, the conqueror unmade not by a stronger conqueror but by a weak woman who would not stop telling him no, and it showed him the night Voss sent the Empire a false report, declared the little world worthless, turned the fleet away from Earth with a lie, and chose, for the first time in his long, cruel life, to protect instead of correct. He turned, the disc said, and for the first time the cold voice did not sound like temptation. It sounded almost like grief. He was the first I ever carried who turned. The Empire calls us who turn by a word I will not translate, because the word is built to make turning unthinkable. They hunt us. They have hunted Voss's line across 8 generations without ever finding it, because Voss hid it in the one place the Empire would never think to look, in weakness, in thinning the blood, in marrying mortals and letting the strength sleep generation after generation, so that no signal would ever wake and bring the fleet. He spent his whole turned life making sure his descendants would be too weak to be noticed. The disc pulsed, and then the strongest of them walked into a forest and died and came back and woke the whole thing up at once, and undid 400 years of his hiding in a single night, and I have been waiting ever since to find out whether you would be Voss, or whether you would be the officer Voss used to be. Harry sat with the disc burning quietly in front of him, and the loneliness of his whole life rearranged itself into something else, into a lineage, a long secret chain of people who had each chosen the hard quiet thing, who had thinned their own blood and hidden their own strength out of love for a world that would never know to thank them. There are others, Harry said slowly. You said the Empire hunts the ones who turn. That means there are others, out there, now. Viltrumites who turned and are still alive and still hiding. A few, the disc said, scattered, hunted, alone, each of them believing themselves the last, because the Empire makes very sure the turned never find one another. Voss died believing he was the only one who had ever chosen mercy. A long pause. He was wrong, and so are they. There has never been a turned Viltrumite who could not be killed quietly alone in the dark by an officer sent to correct him. The lines flared once, and what came next was not temptation and was not grief, but something Harry had never heard from the disc before, something that might have been hope. There has never been one who was also a sorcerer, who could not be cornered, who beats a vanguard and lets it live and sends it home carrying doubt. You are not the last of Voss's line, blood of Viltrum. You may be the first of something the Empire has no word for at all. On the 7th night Harry flew home, to the cottage outside Godric's Hollow, because a man about to fight for a world should look at the small piece of it that was his. The cottage was as he had left it months ago, the field behind it still marked where he had taught himself to land without breaking the grass, the door he had never properly repaired after the Death Eaters. He did not go in. He stood in the field under a sky he could now cross in minutes, and he listened, the way the power let him listen, to the ordinary night of an ordinary village. A dog turning in its sleep, a couple arguing without heat over a forgotten anniversary, a baby waking and being shushed, the milk float's driver already up and moving in the dark before his round. None of them knew. That was the whole of it, standing in the cold field. None of them knew that a fleet was turning toward them across the dark, that their lives hung on 5 people they would never meet, that the price of their ignorance was someone else's vigil. None of them should have to know. Keeping them from ever having to know was the entire job, the only job, the thing Voss had chosen 400 years ago in the same wet country and hidden in his own thin blood so that this night could come and these sleepers could go on sleeping. He walked to the churchyard one more time and stood over the stone. Be good, it is harder than being strong. I worked it out, Dad, he said quietly. What you were trying to tell me, you knew about Voss, but you didn't know the whole of him you couldn't have. He didn't turn because someone beat him. He turned because someone loved him and wouldn't stop telling him the truth. He let out a breath that fogged. I've got 4 of those now. And a whole league, you'd have liked them. Mum would have liked them more, I think. She'd have seen straight through all of us. He laid his hand flat on the cold granite, careful, the way he was careful with everything fragile. There's a fleet coming. The thing in our blood, the thing you warned me about, I'm going to have to use all of it, more than I've ever used. And I wanted to come here first and promise you, where you could hear it, that I'll come back down the right way. That I won't let being big make me stop being good. The dead said nothing, which was their habit, and the habit comforted him. I'll come back and tell you how it went, one way or another. He flew up out of the churchyard into the dark, and below him the village slept on, not knowing which was exactly as it should be, and Harry carried the sleeping ignorance of it up into the cold like the most precious cargo he had ever held. The officer did not wait for the fleet. That was the first thing that told Harry this one was different. He came alone, 8 days after the herald, dropping out of the sky over the watchtower with the casual arrogance of a thing that had never needed an army, and he did not attack. He hung in space off the great window, arms folded, and he waited to be invited in because it amused him to be courteous to the dead. They let him aboard because refusing would have meant a fight in vacuum around a station full of people, and the officer walked into the watchtower's great hall as though he already owned the deed to it, which, in his understanding of the universe, he did. He was old. Harry could see it the way he now saw such things, the particular density of a body that had lived for centuries, and he wore the white and red of the Empire and a face that had been handsome once and had hardened into something past handsome, past human, into the smooth, contemptuous calm of a being for whom every other being in the room was furniture. I am Corvale, he said. I command the vanguard of the fleet that is coming to correct this world. I have evaluated 900 planets in my service. I have accepted the surrender of 40, and I have personally ended the rest, and I have never once in 400 years been surprised. His eyes found Harry and stopped, and something moved in them that was almost the thing he had just claimed never to feel. Until the report on you, a thinned bloodline woken whole. Strength and the local will magic in one vessel. I came ahead of the fleet because I did not believe it, and I wish to be the one to confirm it or disprove it, and I see now that it is true. He inclined his head a fraction, the most respect he had shown a living thing in a long time. You are magnificent. It is a tragedy of arithmetic that you were grown on a world we are obliged to correct. You don't have to correct anything, Harry said. You could turn around, it's allowed. I've heard turning around is very freeing. You misunderstand the nature of what I am, Corvale said without heat. I do not correct worlds because I hate them. I correct them because they are weak. And weakness left alone breeds more weakness, and the galaxy drowns in it, and someone must do the hard and thankless work of keeping the strong strong. It is not cruelty, it is gardening. He turned slowly, taking in the hall, the league arrayed in tents around him, Diana, Dinah, Shara, Zatanna, Clark, the rest. But you, blood of Viltrum, you I do not have to correct. You I have come to offer the only mercy the Empire knows. Join us, take your place. With your strength and your sorcery you would rise high, higher than any officer, perhaps in time to the Regent's own circle. You would be raised to what your blood was always meant to be, instead of squatting here in the mud playing nursemaid to insects who will be dust before you have finished aging a single year. His voice did not change, and that was the horror of it, the absolute sincerity. I am offering you immortality with meaning, dominion, the end of this exhausting pretense that you are one of them. You are not one of them, Harry Potter, you have never been one of them. You are lying to yourself every hour you spend pretending, and somewhere in your blood you know it, because I can hear it answering me even now. And the disc in Harry's coat, where it had ridden quiet for weeks, woke and burned and agreed. This was the temptation then, the real one, the one all the others had been rehearsals for. Not a clean kill in a fight, not the cold arithmetic of strangers. This was the voice in his blood and the empire of his fathers speaking with one mouth, and they were not offering him cruelty. They were offering him belonging, the thing he had wanted since the cupboard under the stairs, the thing he had never once in his whole life been freely given. "You would never be alone again," the voice said, and it was the cruelest thing it had ever said because it was almost true. "You would be among your own kind who would never fear you, who would never need to grab your arm, who would never look at you and see a thing to be managed. You could stop holding the leash. You could stop being careful. You could simply be, at last, exactly as large as you are forever among equals. Is that not all you have ever wanted?" Harry stood in the great hall of the watchtower with the disc burning against his ribs and the oldest hunger of his life laid open by a being who understood it perfectly. And for one long, terrible moment he wanted it with the whole of the lonely orphan he had never stopped being, and the hall held its breath around him. And then he laughed. It surprised even Corvale, it surprised Harry, but it came up out of him real and unforced because the offer had a flaw in it so enormous that he could not believe the Empire had survived 10,000 years without noticing. "You think I'm pretending to be one of them," Harry said. "That's the whole offer, isn't it? Stop pretending, come home, be your real self. And the thing you can't understand, the thing 400 years and 900 dead worlds never taught you is that I'm not pretending." He looked around the hall at the 4 women who had told him plainly, of their own free will, that they had chosen him, at Clark who had taught him to shake hands without crushing, at the whole improbable family of strong people who had decided to stand beside the most dangerous being alive and tell him, "This is the real one. This, right here. The careful, gentle version that holds the leash and pulls weeds by hand and learns to land without breaking the grass. You think the conqueror is the truth and the man is the mask." His voice went quiet and curt. "It's the other way round. It was always the other way round. The conqueror is the easy thing, the lazy thing, the thing any strong fool falls into when he stops trying. The man is the achievement. The man is the thing I built every single day against the voice in my blood, with the help of people who loved me enough to tell me the truth. You're not offering me my real self, Corvale. You're offering me the chance to stop becoming and call the stopping freedom, and I've met the thing you're offering me. It's in my blood and it whispers all day, and I have spent every hour of my life since I woke up telling it no, and I find I'm not tired of telling it. I find I could do it forever." He spread his hands. "So turn around or don't, but the answer is Corvale looked at him for a long moment, and the almost respect in his ancient eyes curdled into something colder. "A pity," he said. "I had hoped to bring you home. The regent will be disappointed." He unfolded his arms, but the offer once refused becomes a verdict. "You are not a son of Viltrum. You are a deserter's mistake that learned to love its mud, and I correct mistakes." He looked deliberately at Diana. "I will start with the ones you love, so that you understand before the end exactly what your sentiment costs. It is the only lesson your kind ever learns, and you never learn it in time." And the great hall of the watchtower became a battlefield. Corvale moved first, and he moved at the woman because he had read Harry exactly as Voldemort had and made exactly Voldemort's mistake. And he went for Diana to break Harry's heart and found instead that he had picked a fight with Wonder Woman. She was waiting for it. She had been waiting for it since he looked at her, and she met 400 years of Viltrumite war with 4,000 years of Amazon craft, and the impact of them coming together blew out every window on the level and would have killed any human in the room had Green Lantern not already thrown a shield. Diana could not match his strength. She had never needed to match strength. She turned it the way she had taught Harry to turn it, and where Corvale expected the brittle resistance of a lesser being, he found a warrior who flowed around his power and made him pay for every motion, and his ancient certainty cracked. A hairline, the first crack in 400 years. It was the opening the others had drilled for, because they had drilled for this. That was the thing Corvale could not have known, the thing no Viltrumite had ever faced, because no world had ever fought them as a team that had spent months learning to fight as one. Harry had brought them the Empire's weaknesses out of the disc itself, every flaw the Viltrumites hid even from their own records, and the League had built 8 days of tactics around them. Canary's cry came first, pitched not to deafen a human but to shatter a Viltrumite, because Harry had learned from the disc that the inner ear that let them fly also made them exquisitely vulnerable to a sound aimed exactly right, and Dinah had spent 8 days learning the exact right sound. Her scream took Corvale across his sense of balance like a blade, and the master of 900 worlds staggered in the air, his flight stuttering, his certainty cracking wider. Hawkgirl hit him while he staggered. Nth metal, the one substance in the galaxy that Viltrumite skin had no answer for, because it was older than physics and answered well the way magic did. And her mace came down across his shoulder and he felt it, actually felt it. The first pain Corvale had felt from a lesser being in 2 centuries, and the shock on his ancient face was worth, Harry thought, almost everything. He recovered, of course. 400 years does not stagger for long. He caught Hawkgirl's mace on the backswing and seized her by the wing and meant to break her against the floor, and that was when he learned the second thing the team had drilled, which was that they did not fight as 5 soldiers but as one organism, and you could not hurt one of them without all of them answering. Diana's lasso took his wrist before the throw landed blazing gold, and the truth fire of it burned into him, a thing his kind never permitted themselves. A single instant of seeing himself clearly, and he flinched and Shayera tore free, and Clark hit him from the blind side with the full freight train weight of Krypton's sun, and for a moment the master of 900 worlds was simply a body in a storm of people who would not stop coming. He fought back brilliantly. Harry gave him that even then. He broke Clark's grip and put him through 3 bulkheads. He shrugged off a second of Canary's cries by clamping his own ruined hearing shut through sheer will. He caught one of Zatanna's conjured chains and reversed her own, working back at her so that she had to throw herself flat as her own magic raked the wall where she'd stood. He was the most dangerous single thing any of them had ever fought, and he was fighting for his life now, the certainty gone, replaced by the cornered ferocity of a predator that has discovered too late that it walked into a pack. But a pack was the one thing his kind had never had to fight, because his kind had never let themselves need one. And in the eye of the storm of them, Harry came. Zatanna's magic took the floor out from under his certainty in a different way. She did not attack his body, she attacked the rules. Idivarg Esrever, she said, and gravity in the hall around Corvale reversed and tripled and turned sideways, and a being who had spent 400 years trusting absolutely in his command of the air found the air itself betraying him, conjured chains of pure force binding his limbs, the laws he relied on rewritten by a woman who answered to no law but her own will. He tore free, of course. He was a Viltrumite. But tearing free cost him, and the cost was the seconds, and in this fight as in every fight the seconds were the lifetime. And in the gaps the others made, Harry came. They had rehearsed this without ever saying so, 8 days of it, and now it came together with the wordless precision of people who had each decided the others were worth dying beside. Canary's cry took the officer's balance, Hawkgirl's mace found the one wound his skin could not refuse, Zatanna's reversed laws stole the air he trusted, Diana's craft turned his every motion into a cost. None of them could have beaten him alone. None of them had to. They were not 5 soldiers fighting a Viltrumite. They were one organism with 5 sets of hands, and the Empire, which had spent 10,000 years ensuring its soldiers never needed anyone, had no answer at all for a thing that fought as one because it had chosen, freely, to be one. And in the gaps the others made, Harry came. He came with the throttle wide open for the first time since the power woke. He let the cold flood rise to the top of itself, all the way up past every ceiling he had built, and he felt the Conqueror's strength uncoil to its full and terrible length, and Corvale's eyes widened because only now he was looking at the thing the report had promised. A Viltrumite at full strength who also bent the rules of magic, the single most dangerous being in this arm of the galaxy, off the leash at last. He came the way a tide comes, the way nothing on earth had ever come at Corvale, full and rising and unstoppable, and the officer met him and was, for the first time in 4 centuries, overmatched in the one currency he had always trusted absolutely. They traded blows that cracked the watchtower's spine, that flung both of them through the great window into the silent dark and back, that lit the night over the turning earth with the impacts of 2 impossible bodies meeting at the top of their strength. Corvale fought with 400 years of refined and merciless craft. Harry fought with a year of bruises and a head full of the Empire's own hidden weaknesses and the whole rising flood of a Viltrumite at last unleashed. And the difference, the only difference, the difference that decided it, was that every time the cold strength surged toward cruelty, Harry turned it instead toward the work, kept it honest, kept it his. But Harry's hand was on the throttle. That was the thing 8 days in the asteroids had bought him. He went all the way to the top of himself, and he stayed himself, stayed gentle even as he stopped being careful, channeled the full flood not into cruelty but into exactly the work the moment required, and he hit Corvale with the whole of what he was, and for the first time the ancient officer was driven back and down. It could have ended there. It nearly did. Harry had Corvale down, the throttle wide and his hand still on it, and the voice in his blood, the Empire and the disc and 400 years of his own ancestors, roared at him with one voice to finish it, to crush the officer's skull and send the fleet a message written in the death of their champion. And oh, it would have been so easy, the easiest thing in the world, and it would even have worked. And Corvale, beaten, pinned, looked up at him with something that was not fear, because he had never learned fear, but was the closest thing his kind had to it, which was understanding. "Do it," the officer said, through bloodied teeth. "I would. There is no version of this where I would not. You have me. Finish it and prove the report wrong and prove me right and become, in the last second, exactly what you spent all that breath denying. Do it, blood of Viltrum, I am giving you permission. End me the way your blood is screaming for you to. And Harry, with the throttle wide and the whole hall watching and the conqueror's joy singing in him to take the kill that was offered and earned and free, looked down at the most dangerous being he had ever fought and let go of the throttle and did not. No, he said, you don't get to make me into you with your dying breath. That's the last trick your kind has, isn't it? You can't beat me, so you try to win by making me win wrong. It won't work. I've had a lot of practice this year at not taking the kill that's offered. He stood up off the beaten officer, and around the hall the League held their positions, breathing hard, alive, all of them, and Harry looked down at Corvail and gave him the thing no Viltrumite had ever given another, which was mercy without contempt. Go home, tell the Regent what you saw. Tell him there's a Viltrumite on Earth who beat your vanguard with 4 women and a wizard and didn't take the kill when it was free, and watch what that does to 10,000 years of believing strength is the only argument. You won't be able to untell it. It'll sit in you. I've seen it start already in your face when Shayera's mace hurt you and you felt something you'd forgotten you could feel. He stepped back. You felt small. For 1 second you felt small, and you've spent 400 years making sure no one ever made you feel it. Sit with that. It's the most honest thing that's happened to you in centuries. Corvail rose, slowly, broken and bleeding and ancient, and he looked at Harry for a long moment, and the curdled contempt in his eyes had gone somewhere stranger, somewhere troubled, and Harry, who had spent a year learning to read the things in faces that people did not want read, saw the crack widen 1 degree further. The fleet will come regardless, the officer said. I cannot stop it. The Regent will not turn it for 1 beaten vanguard. You have bought nothing but time, and not much of it. He rose into the shattered window, into the dark beyond, but I will tell him what I saw, all of it. Even the part where you let me live. A pause, and the next words came as though they cost him a thing he had not known he still possessed. There are others, you know, out in the dark, Viltrumites who turned long ago. We hunt them. We call them the worst word our language has. He looked at Harry, and the troubled thing in his eyes was almost a question. I have killed 3 of them in my service. I have never, until tonight, wondered whether I was wrong to. And he was gone, up into the dark, carrying the crack in his certainty home to an empire that had never had one. And Harry hung in the wrecked hall of the watchtower with the wind of vacuum howling past the shields and the people he loved alive around him, and understood that he had not won. He had only made the coming war 1 degree less certain, and planted, in the heart of the enemy's champion, a single seed of doubt. And on a long enough scale, a single seed of doubt was the most dangerous weapon in any universe. They sealed the hall and they tended their hurts, which were many and none of them fatal. And in the gray, exhausted hours afterward, the 5 of them ended up where they always ended up, the observation deck, the turning earth, the quiet. You let go of the throttle, Diana said. She had a cut along her jaw that she had refused to let anyone close, a warrior's vanity Harry found unbearably dear. I watched you. You went all the way to the top of yourself, further than I have ever seen you go, and you stayed you. Do you understand what you did? Do you understand that no one has ever done it? The strong become the strength. Always. It is the oldest story there is. And you went to the very top of the strength, and you came back down still holding your own hand. She shook her head. I have lived 4,000 years. I did not believe it could be done. I had help, Harry said. 4 of you in the hand. You told me you would be. He looked around the circle of them, battered and alive, and the thing he felt was too large for a named emotion, so he did not name it. Shayera made me find the top. Dinah found the exact sound. Zatanna broke the rules he trusted. And you took the strongest being in the galaxy and made him doubt himself with your bare hands before I ever landed a blow. He let out a breath. He came to offer me belonging. That was the trap in it. He'd worked out that the one thing I've wanted my whole life is to not be alone, and he was right, and for a second it nearly had me. He looked at them. And then I looked up, and there you were, all of you, and I realized I already have it. The thing he was offering me as the prize for becoming a monster, I already have it for free for choosing not to be one. That's the joke the Empire will never get. They think belonging is the reward for power. It's the reward for being someone worth belonging to. Zatanna leaned her head against his shoulder, and Dinah took his hand. And Shayera, who did not do this, stood close enough that it counted. And Diana put her battered self against his other side, and the 5 of them watched the Earth turn 8 days from a war they were not sure they could win, and held the only thing that no fleet could take because no one had given it because it had been chosen. The fleet's still coming, Shayera said into the quiet, because someone had to, and it was always her. I know, Harry said, let it. We've got 8 days, and we just beat their best, and we planted something in him on the way out that's going to keep him up at night for the rest of his life. He tightened his hand around Dinah's. And we're not going to spend the 8 days afraid. We're going to spend them being the thing the Empire can't understand, right up until the moment they arrive and find out the hard way what it costs to come for people who have decided they will not be moved. Far out in the dark, a beaten officer flew home toward an empire that had never lost, carrying a crack in its certainty like a stone in his shoe. and behind him a blue world turned, full of people who would never know how close it had come, defended by 5 beings who had chosen each other freely. Which was the one thing in all the long arithmetic of conquest that the strongest empire in the galaxy had never once learned to fight. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. 2 storms. The fleet came out of the dark on the 12th day, and it did not look like an armada. That was the first lie the empire told, even in the way it arrived. It looked like a new constellation, a scatter of cold white stars that had not been in the sky the night before, arranged with a geometry too perfect to be anything but made, and it hung above the earth in absolute silence, and it waited because the empire that had never lost could afford to let a world look up and understand for one long hour exactly what was coming. Then the stars began to descend, and they were not stars. They were warships the size of cities, and ahead of them, falling faster, came the soldiers, hundreds of them, white and red against the blue, each one a corvale, each one a being that had spent centuries living at the top of its strength, and they came down on the cities of earth in a rain of conquerors. The world watched it come because the empire wanted the world to watch. Every screen on the planet carried the descent, and across 100 languages the same understanding arrived in the same hour, that the things falling out of the sky could not be reasoned with, could not be bargained with, could not be fought by any army the earth had ever fielded. In Lagos and Lima and Mumbai, people did the things people do when the sky fills with gods. They ran, they prayed, they gathered the ones they loved and held them, they looked up. And in 1,000 places they did the other thing, the thing the empire never understood about the worlds it corrected, which was that ordinary people, knowing they could not win, helped each other anyway, carried the slow and the small and the frightened, opened their homes and their shelters, refused in the last hour to be only afraid. In the Watchtower, the League made its last assembly, and Batman did not give a speech because Batman did not believe in speeches, and what he gave instead was worse and better. "We lose the opening exchange," he said. "We have always known we lose the opening exchange. The plan does not survive contact, no plan does. What survives is this: every one of you knows your piece, and every one of you trusts the person next to you to hold theirs, and the enemy has never once in 10,000 years fought a thing that trusts." He looked at Harry last, the way the whole room had begun without deciding to look at Harry last. "Buy us the seconds, we will spend them well." Jayon said the last thing, because someone had to say the thing Batman would not. He did it without speaking aloud. He simply opened the channel of himself to all of them at once, so that for a moment every member of the League felt in their own skull the calm grave presence of the Martian, and underneath it the thing he had carried alone since his world burned. "I have watched a world end," he told them, all of them, in the place words could not reach. "I am the last of mine because no one came. I tell you this not to grieve, but so that you understand what we are about to refuse to let happen, and why I would rather die in this sky than watch another world learn the silence I live in." And then the presence withdrew, gentle, leaving each of them steadier for having been, however briefly, less alone, and the League went to its stations carrying a Martian's grief like a banner. The League met them, and the world's other defenders met them, every hero who could fly or fight or hold a line, and the sky over a dozen cities filled with the impossible war. But Harry, rising to meet the descending host with the throttle of himself already opening, understood the arithmetic in the first instant, because he had always been good at the arithmetic he pretended to hate. The League could fight Viltrumites now. They had proven it. They could fight one with all of them together and every trick they owned. They could not fight 300. No one could fight 300. The math did not bend. The math had never bent for any world. So Harry did the thing he had decided in the long nights of the 11 days that he would have to do, and he made himself the storm the Empire had come to correct. He went up into the descending host alone, and he let go of the leash all the way, the throttle wide, the cold flood rising to the very top of itself, and he stopped being careful because there was no one up here to break, only the strongest beings in the galaxy come to murder his world. And at last, with no one near enough to break, Harry Potter used the whole of what he was without a single ounce held back. He hit the vanguard of the descending soldiers like a world hitting them, and he did not hold the throttle to spare them. He held it to keep himself, and the difference was everything, and it was invisible from outside. And the soldiers of Viltrum learned in the first 30 seconds of the invasion of Earth that the report had been true, that the contamination was real, and that it was, against every law their empire was built on, stronger than they were. They came at him in the formations 4 centuries of supremacy had perfected, and the formations did not matter. Harry had spent the 11 days learning the top of himself, and now he lived there, and the soldiers of Viltrum discovered one after another that the half-breed did not fight like prey and did not fight like a Viltrumite either. He fought like a wizard who happened to be the strongest thing in the sky, which meant he was always already where they were going to be. Many caught the blow before it landed and turned the body that threw it into the next soldier's path, meant that when a squadron coordinated to take him from 6 directions at once, he simply was not there, a sphere of hardened air blooming around him so that their converging fury broke against itself. He did not kill them. That was the thing that unmade their certainty faster than any blow. He took them apart and left them living, broke the flight from them and dropped them stunned into Green Lantern's waiting cages. And a soldier of the Empire who had expected death and received mercy was a soldier whose entire understanding of the universe had just developed a crack. Harry was making cracks faster than he was making casualties, and the cracks, he knew, would outlast the war. It was the thing no Viltrumite had a defense against, because it was not a weapon their doctrine recognized. They knew how to be killed. Killing was the language they had spoken for 10,000 years, and a soldier who fell in battle fell understanding exactly what had happened to him. What they did not know how to be was spared by something stronger than they were. Mercy from a weaker foe was contempt, a thing to be avenged. Mercy from a stronger one was a question, and questions, in a Viltrumite mind that had never been permitted to ask any, did not heal over the way wounds did. Harry left a trail of living, questioning soldiers across the sky over Earth, and each of them carried home, into the heart of the most certain empire in the galaxy, the unbearable fact that the contamination had had them at its mercy and had chosen, for reasons their doctrine could not name, to let them live. It was not enough. He had known it would not be enough. One being vast as he had become against 300 in a fleet was a delay, not a victory, and Harry had not gone up to win. He had gone up to buy the seconds, because in every fight he had ever survived, the seconds were the lifetime, and the League had a plan that needed seconds, and Harry was the richest source of seconds the world had ever produced. Below him and around him the plan unfolded. Batman's 11 sleepless days became 100 small, brilliant things at once. The orbital defenses Earth's governments had been secretly building for years, fired in concert for the first time, not to destroy the warships, which they could not, but to blind their sensors and foul their coordination. Green Lantern's ring, joined now by a core of others summoned across the void by the gravity of a doomed world. Weaving constructs the size of weather systems, catching falling soldiers in cages of will. Zatanna, working from the heart of the watchtower with a dozen of Earth's sorcerers she had spent the 11 days gathering, rewriting the rules over whole cities so that Viltrumite flight stuttered and Viltrumite strength met resistances that physics did not allow. The laws themselves enlisted in the defense. And the women he loved, each at the center of a battle, doing the thing they did. Canary's cry, amplified through Atlantean technology Aquaman had brought up from the deep, pitched across whole districts to take the balance from squadrons of soldiers at once. Hawkgirl leading a wing of Thanagarian exiles, she had called in on debts a decade-old, nth metal weapons cutting the one wound Viltrumite skin could not refuse. Diana on the ground in the heart of the worst of it, where the soldiers had broken through to a city of 11 million, holding a line with the Amazons of the Themyscira at her back, 4,000 years of war made flesh, buying the seconds with her body the way Harry bought them with his. And the doubt Harry had planted paid its first small dividend in a place no one had planned for. Corvale led a wing of the vanguard, as an officer must, and his soldiers looked to him for the tempo of the slaughter, and the tempo did not come. He fought because 400 years cannot be unlearned in 12 days, but he fought a half-beat slow, and when his squadrons broke through to a district of the city, he did not give the order to make the example the Empire's doctrine demanded, the order that turned a conquered street into a lesson written in the dead. He hesitated. One officer on one front, hesitating, and the soldiers under him felt it, the way soldiers always feel it, and a wing of the invasion of Earth fought that day with a question in it that had never been in a Viltrumite formation before, and the question cost them seconds, and the seconds were the lifetime, and Harry, catching the lull in the corner of his vast attention, understood that a single seed of doubt had grown 1 degree further in the dark. Across the burning world the others held their pieces. Canary, perched on a shattered tower with the Atlantean amplifier at her throat, learned in real time the exact frequency that took the balance from a Viltrumite a city block away, and rewrote it on the fly as the soldiers adapted, a duel of sound and will conducted across rooftops. Zatanna and her gathered sorcerers, hands joined in a ring at the heart of the watchtower, held the rewritten laws over 3 cities until their noses bled, and held them still, because letting go meant letting physics go back to favoring the gods. Hawkgirl's wing of Thanagarian exiles, a dozen old soldiers who owed her old debts, cut into the fleet's flank with nth metal blades, the one wound the Empire could not refuse, and Shara flew at the front of them the way she did everything, blunt and fierce and without a single wasted motion. And the soldiers learned to fear the woman with the mace who did not miss. It was the most magnificent thing Harry had ever seen, and it was losing. Slowly, gloriously, magnificently, against an enemy that had never been made to work this hard for a world, Earth was losing, because 300 was 300 and a fleet was a fleet and the math did not bend. And then the math got worse. The dark behind the moon tore open and it was not a Viltrumite ship. Harry felt it before he saw it, the particular wrongness of a boom tube on a scale he had never imagined. A wound in space not the size of a doorway but the size of a continent, and through it came the second storm, and the second storm was apocalypse. Kanto had not lied. Darkseid had been waiting for exactly this, for the moment the Viltrumite fleet and the Earth's defenders ground each other down, for the perfect instant to reach into a battlefield exhausted by two great powers and take the prize they had both come for. The Paradum legions poured through the continental boom tube in their millions, a living darkness blotting out the false constellation of the fleet, and they did not attack the cities and they did not attack the Viltrumites. They came for Harry. They came for the women. They came with the cold purpose of a god who collected leverage, and Kanto rode at the front of them with his cane and his courtesy, and his amplified voice rolled across the whole burning sky. "Forgive the intrusion," Kanto said, to the fleet and the earth and the contamination all at once. "My master sends his regards to the Empire and his condolences, for he has come to collect a thing you both desire and only one of you may have. He is generous. He will let you keep the planet Viltrum once we have removed what makes it valuable. Consider it a professional courtesy between conquerors." The Paradumans came in numbers that broke the mind's ability to count, a living tide that did not so much fill the sky as become it, blotting the false constellation of the fleet into a darkness lit only by the war's own fires. Where the Viltrumites were precise, a host of identical perfect soldiers, the Apocalyptian Legion was the opposite, a churning chaos of teeth and wings and hunger, and the two aesthetics of conquest met over the earth like oil meeting flame. Harry had read about apocalypse in the disc and in Sheara's grim tutorials, but reading was nothing beside the fact of it, the sheer industrial scale of a civilization that had turned cruelty into infrastructure, that fielded its soldiers the way a foundry pours iron, endlessly, without grief, without limit. And riding the front of it, Kanto picked his way through the slaughter with his cane and his courtesy intact, an artist surveying a canvas that other, lesser hands had primed for him. And Harry, hanging in the burning sky between two storms, with the fleet above and apocalypse behind and his world dying below, did the only thing a man who was good at hated arithmetic could do. He stopped trying to win the battle in front of him and he looked at the whole board at once, the way he had looked at Voldemort's trap, the way he had been looking at problems his entire life, and he found the move. "They both want me," he said into the calm, fast and clean, "both of them. The fleet won't let Darkseid take a Viltrumite asset. It's a humiliation they can't survive. It undoes 10,000 years of being the strongest thing in the galaxy. And Darkseid won't leave without me. He's committed a continental boom tube and a million Paradumans. He can't be seen to fail. Neither of them can back down. Neither of them can let the other have me." His voice went hard with the cold clarity of the solution assembling. "So I'm going to make them fight over me. I'm going to stop being the thing two empires are fighting near, and start being the thing two empires are fighting for, and then I'm going to get out of the middle and let the two strongest powers in this arm of the galaxy spend themselves on each other." "Harry," Diana's voice from the burning ground, "that puts you at the center of both of them at once. There's no margin in that. If it goes wrong, you are alone between two storms." "I know," Harry said. "Trust me on the arithmetic. I'll trust you on the rest." And he flew deliberately into the exact center of the burning sky, into the one point that both storms could see, and he made himself the prize, and he watched the two strongest empires in the galaxy turn slowly, terribly toward each other. It was a strange thing to do on purpose, to make of yourself a target large enough that two empires would forget everything else to reach for it. Harry hung in the center of the sky with the war wheeling around him, and he did not hide, did not shield, did not move, made himself instead the most visible thing in the heavens, a beacon of the one prize both powers had crossed the dark to claim. "Here I am," the whole posture of him said to the fleet and to Apocalypse both. "Here is the thing you came for. Come and take it from each other." And he felt their attention swing toward him, felt the calculus shift in 300 Viltrumite minds and a million Paradoman ones, felt the dreadful gravity of being wanted by gods. The Viltrumite vanguard reacted first, because the Viltrumite vanguard could not do otherwise. To let Apocalypse seize a Viltrumite asset, even a contaminated one, even one they had come to destroy, was a humiliation that 10,000 years of supremacy could not metabolize. Their entire identity was that they were the strongest, that what they wanted they took, that no power in the galaxy outranked them. For Darkseid to reach past them and pluck the prize from under their hands would be to announce to every conquered world that the Empire had a master, and that announcement was worth more to them, suddenly, than the world they had come to correct. So they turned from the cities, all of them, and they fell upon the Paredaman host with the full contemptuous fury of beings defending the one thing they truly worshipped, which was their own supremacy. An apocalypse committed, God-driven, a continental boom tube and 1,000,000 soldiers already spent, could not withdraw without proving the empire right. So it answered. And the two storms, which had circled each other warily over a shared prize, finally and fully met. It very nearly worked perfectly. That was the thing Harry would carry afterward, the so nearly of it. The Viltrumite vanguard, faced with the unthinkable sight of apocalypse reaching for an asset they had claimed, did exactly what 10,000 years of supremacy had built them to do. They attacked the Paredaman host with the full contemptuous fury of beings who had never once been challenged for anything they wanted. And Darkseid's legions, committed and God-driven, answered. The two storms collided in the sky over Earth, and for the space of a few minutes the planet's defenders were forgotten entirely, two apex powers spending themselves on each other in a war so vast it darkened the sun, exactly as Harry had planned, and the cities below got the one thing they had needed and could not buy, which was a chance to breathe and to run. And then Kanto, who was an artist and who had read the move the moment Harry made it, did the cruel and clever thing that artists do. He could not reach Harry, the storms were between them. So he reached for the thing Harry had walked into the center of the sky to protect, and he aimed his master's purpose not at the contamination, but at the women, because Kanto had told Harry months ago in a flooded subway exactly what Darkseid understood, that you did not break a man like Harry by hitting him, you broke him by making him choose. Kanto chose his moment the way an artist chooses a brushstroke. In the instant the two storms had fully engaged and Harry was furthest from the ground, committed to the center of the sky he had drawn them to. He could not reach Harry. The storms were between them, a wall of warring gods, but he did not need to reach Harry. He had told the wizard the truth in a flooded subway months ago, and the truth had not changed. You did not break a man like this by hitting him. The strike came for Diana on the ground, holding her line. A weapon Harry had no name for, a lance of pure apocalyptic annihilation fired from the heart of the Paredaman host, aimed not at the Amazon but at the city of 11 million behind her, the city she was the only thing standing in front of, so that she would have to choose between her own life and theirs, the way the Empire and the God both believed all heroes secretly chose themselves. Diana did not choose herself, of course she did not. She put her body and her bracers and 4,000 years of war between the annihilation and the 11 million, and she held it, and it was too much even for her, and Harry, 1,000 miles up between two storms, heard her cry out over the comm for the first time in all the months he had known her, and the sound of it did the thing to him that no temptation ever had. He moved. He moved faster than he had ever moved, faster than the plan, faster than thought, abandoning the perfect center of the burning sky, crossing 1,000 miles in the time it took the lance to burn through the last of Diana's strength, and he got there. He got there. He put himself between Diana and the annihilation in the final instant, took the full weight of a god's weapon on his own body, on the Viltrumite invulnerability pushed past every ceiling, and it hurt more than the war, more than dying in the forest, and he held it, and he did not let it past him to the city or to her. The weapon did not stop when it met him. It pushed. Harry felt the Viltrumite invulnerability that had shrugged off killing curses and a Dark Lord's perfect fist strain against a god's annihilation. Felt it begin, for the first time, to fail, felt the edge of the lance bite into him the way nothing ever had, and he held it anyway, drove his own enormous strength back against it, refused it the city and refused it Diana and refused it himself. Until the firing ran dry and the lance guttered and died against a man who had simply declined to let it pass. And Diana fell against him, spent, gravely hurt but alive, and the relief of it was so total that for one instant the cold flood in Harry's blood went quiet. And then the rage came up to fill the quiet, and the rage was the most dangerous thing he had ever felt. The voice in his blood had never sounded like this. It had always been patient, reasonable, sweet. Now it was none of those things. Now it was simply present, vast, and it was offering him in the white space where Diana had nearly died, the thing he had spent his whole life refusing, and for the first time it was not asking. It was simply opening the door and waiting to see if he would walk through it on his own. They hurt her, the voice said. They reach past you the way the small clever cowards always do, and they hurt the woman who put her body in front of 11 million strangers, and you have in you right now at the top of yourself the power to make sure nothing in this sky ever hurts anyone you love again. Not by protecting them, by ending the things that would, all of them, the fleet, the legions, Kanto, Darkseid, you could do it. You are strong enough, you have always been strong enough, and the only thing that has ever stopped you is a principle you inherited from people who were too weak to need it. Diana is bleeding in your arms. The principle did that. Let it go. Be what your blood made you. Be what the universe needs, just this once, and grieve the principle later, over the graves it would have made. And Harry, with Diana gravely hurt against his chest and two storms burning over a dying world and the whole terrible flood of himself at the very top of its strength, came closer to walking through that door than he had ever come, closer than the subway, closer than Riddle, closer than Corvale's offer. Because this time the arithmetic was not about strangers. This time it was about her. And the voice was right that he was strong enough. And the voice was right that the principle had a cost, and that the cost was bleeding in his arms. Harry, Diana's voice weak against his chest, and he looked down and her eyes were open and fixed on his face. And she had seen, even gravely hurt, even spent, she had seen the door opening behind his eyes because she was Diana and she never looked away. Don't, she said. I know what you're feeling. I have felt it. The day they took my mother's island, I felt it. The whole world narrowed to the ones who hurt what I loved and the power to unmake them. Her hand found his. And I learned the thing you have to learn right now in this exact second, or we lose you, and losing you is worse than losing the war. The rage is not love. It feels like love. It is wearing love's face. But love protects. Rage avenges. And the moment you cross from the one to the other, you stop protecting me and start using me, using my blood as the excuse for the thing you always wanted permission to do. Her grip tightened, fierce even in ruin. I did not put my body in front of those people so that you could put my pain in front of yours. Protect them, protect me, don't avenge me, I'm not dead, don't make me the reason you died inside. And Harry, holding her, holding the whole flood of himself at the top of its terrible strength, with the door wide open and the voice waiting, chose. He let go of the rage, not the strength, the rage. He kept the flood and released the fury, kept the power and refused the permission, and the door the voice had opened stood empty, and Harry did not walk through it. And the voice, for the first time in the whole of his life, went silent, not because it had been beaten, but because it had at last run out of arguments, because it had played its highest card, the woman bleeding in his arms, and lost. They came to him then, the others, in the eye of the storm where he knelt with Diana. Dinah dropped from a shattered span and was on her knees beside them before Harry could speak, hands already moving over Diana's wounds with the brisk competence that had pulled people out of worse, murmuring the reassurances that were also commands. Shayera landed hard, mace dripping, and put her back to the three of them and her wings wide, a living wall against the sky, and did not say a word, because guarding was the truest thing she had to give, and she gave it. And Zatanna's voice came down the comm from the watchtower, ragged with the cost of holding 3 cities worth of rewritten law, and what she said was not a spell but his name, just his name, the way you say a name to remind someone whose it is. 4 of them around him in the worst hour, doing the thing the Empire and the God had bet they would never do, which was refuse to be his weakness and insist instead on being his reason. The voice in his blood had nothing left to say to it. It had spent its highest card and found the card worthless, because the thing it had tried to weaponize had turned, in his hands, into the exact thing that held him. All right, Harry said softly to Diana, to the voice, to himself. All right, protect, not avenge, I hear you, I've got you. He lifted his head and the cold flood was wholly his now, every drop of it, the rage burned off and the strength remaining, the largest he had ever been and entirely himself. Hold on, all of you. I'm going to end this and I'm going to end it the right way, and then I'm going to come and tell my dad how it went. He laid the words down like a promise to himself as much as to her, and the saying of it settled something. He had spent the whole war reacting, buying seconds, holding lines, herding storms. Now with the rage burned off and the strength wholly his and the woman he loved alive in the care of her sisters, he stopped reacting. He looked at the burning sky the way he had once looked at Voldemort's trap, the way he had looked at every problem since he was a child being hunted, and he found in the wreckage of 2 armies the shape of the thing he had to do, and the clarity of it was the cleanest feeling he had owned all day. He laid Diana in the care of her Amazons, and he rose back into the burning sky, and he changed the shape of the war. He had been buying seconds. Now he spent them. With the throttle wide and his hand wholly on it, Harry moved through the 2 storms not as a prize but as a force, and he did the thing that neither empire had accounted for, because neither empire had ever fought a being who fought to protect instead of to win. He did not try to destroy the fleet. He herded it. He did not try to slaughter the legions. He drove them. He used the full enormous strength of himself as a shepherd uses a dog, turning the 2 storms harder into each other, closing the distance they had opened, making the collision total, and where a Viltrumite soldier broke off to attack a city, Harry was there to turn him back into the Parademan host, and where a Parademan wave peeled toward the women, Harry was there to drive it back into the fleet, and slowly, with the cold flood entirely his to command. He made the 2 strongest powers in the galaxy spend themselves on each other so completely that neither had anything left for the world below. He learned the new work as he did it, the way he had learned everything since the power woke. A force this large could not be aimed like a fist, it had to be aimed like weather, and Harry became weather, a front of moving strength that the two storms broke against and could not break through. He found that he could be in a dozen places in a span of seconds, that he could turn a Viltrumite charge by being a wall in front of it, and then be a wall in front of the Paradigm answer before the first wall had finished falling, that the whole burning sky could be herded by a single being who was fast enough and strong enough and, crucially, did not care about winning, only about where the violence was pointed. The empires cared about winning. That was their weakness, the one Diana had named above the asteroids. They fought to conquer, and so they could be made to chase, and a thing that fights to protect can always outposition a thing that fights to own, because protecting tells you exactly where to stand and owning only tells you what to grab. He could not be everywhere, and the places he was not, the cost came due. Superman fought 3 soldiers at once over the drowned remains of a coastal city and gave better than he got, and still came away slower, the heat of the war banking down his strength. The Flash ran the whole burning world as one continuous errand of mercy, carrying the trapped and the falling faster than the eye, and even he was beginning to gray with exhaustion at the edges. Jayon held the comms together with his mind across a dozen fronts, a calm grave voice in every defender's skull telling them where to turn and who needed them, and Harry could feel the strain of it leaking through, the Martian spending himself like coin. They were the mightiest beings the Earth had ever fielded, and they were being ground down, not because they were losing the fights in front of them, but because the fights in front of them never stopped coming, and that was the Empire's real weapon, that was Darkseid's, the simple, inhuman arithmetic of more. Harry shepherded the two storms into each other and bought the seconds and watched, helpless against the scale of it, as the people he loved spent themselves keeping a world alive that did not know to thank them, and he understood that no amount of his own strength could change the math, that the only thing that could change the math was making the storms spend themselves first, and so he flew and turned and herded and held. It was working. It was, against every law of the universe's arithmetic, working, and the cities had stopped dying and the League had begun to breathe, and Harry hung at the top of himself in the center of the burning sky and let himself believe for one instant that he might save it all. He should have known better than to believe it, and afterward he would be hard on himself for the believing, because hope in the middle of a war is the thing that makes you a half-second slow. But the cities had gone quiet beneath him, and the League's exhausted voices on the comm had begun one by one to report districts holding that an hour ago had been falling, and the two storms were tearing each other apart exactly as he had drawn them to. And for the length of a few breaths, the arithmetic of the impossible had finally, against all the odds the universe stacks against small blue worlds, started to come out in Earth's favor. It was the best he had felt since the power woke, that handful of breaths, the sense of a thing being saved by people who had no business saving it. He would remember it later as the moment before, the clean line that the rest of the day fell off of, and he would understand that he had earned even the believing, because they had come so close, so very close to enough. And then the dark behind the moon tore open a second time, and the second tear was worse than the first, and through it unhurried came a being on a chariot of living fire, and the Paradigm and legions in the middle of their war with the fleet, stopped all of them at once and bowed. The being was the size of a mountain and the shape of a man, gray and graven and ancient past the Empire's oldest dreams, and his eyes were 2 seams of red fire that had burned out the hope of 1,000 worlds. And when he spoke, the whole burning sky went quiet to listen, the fleet and the legions and the dying cities and Harry himself, because there are voices the universe is built to obey. He did not hurry. That was the thing about Darkseid that the fleet, for all its supremacy, had never managed, the absolute economy of him, a being so certain of his own inevitability that he had never once in his existence needed to rush. The chariot of living fire bore him down through the wreckage of 2 armies as though through a garden gone slightly to seed, and where his red gaze passed, Paradigmans bowed and Viltrumite soldiers, the proudest beings in the galaxy, found themselves uncertain whether to fight or flee, because here at last was a thing their empire had no doctrine for, a power that did not care about their strength because it had moved, long ago, beyond caring about strength at all. Darkseid did not collect strength. Strength was common, the galaxy was lousy with it. Darkseid collected the one thing rarer than strength, which was the certainty that there was no will in the universe that could not, eventually, be made to kneel. He had come to add Harry to that collection. He had come, in truth, for the proof of a thesis, and the thesis was that everything kneels. Enough, said Darkseid. He looked across the war, the fleet he had bled and the legions he had spent, and found them beneath his notice, and his red gaze settled at last on the small, enormous thing hanging in the center of the sky. The pieces have moved themselves into position. The Empire has spent its vanguard. My legions have spent themselves. And the prize hangs in the center, exactly where it was always going to hang, having cleverly arranged for everyone else to exhaust themselves first. Something that was not amusement and was worse moved across the graven face. You have done my work for me, blood of Viltrum. I had thought to take you from a battlefield. Instead you have emptied the battlefield yourself and saved me the trouble, and now there is no fleet and no legion and no Amazon and no league with anything left, and there is only you, and there is only me. Come, or watch what I do to the world while you decide. I am Darkseid. I have all the time there has ever been, and you have none of it. Around him the war had stopped. The fleet, what was left of it, hung spent and scattered. The paradum and legions had gone still, bowed to their master, the League. Every one of them knelt or sagged or simply hung in the ruined sky with nothing left to give. Having spent the seconds Harry bought them down to the last. The plan had worked. The two storms had broken each other, exactly as Harry had arranged, and the cities had survived, and it had all been in service of emptying the board for this. For the one move that had been coming since a disc woke in a vault, the move where the strongest thing the Earth had ever made faced the strongest the galaxy had ever produced, alone, with nothing in reserve but the choice he had spent a year learning how to make. And Harry hung at the top of himself in the silent sky, the largest and most dangerous he had ever been, and looked across the burning world at the god of tyrants, and understood that everything before this had been the seconds, and that the lifetime had finally arrived. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Omni, the god of tyrants, and the heir of a deserter faced each other across a sky that had stopped burning, and for a moment neither of them moved, because both of them understood that everything that came next would be remembered, if anyone survived to remember it. You arranged all of this, Darkseid said. The red seams of his eyes moved over the wreckage of two armies, the spent fleet, the bowed legions, the kneeling defenders of a small blue world. You set two empires against each other and emptied the field, and you did it not to win which you could not, but to ensure that when the end came it would be only us. You wish to face me alone. Something graven and terrible shifted on his face. Vanity. You believe the final exchange is yours to script. It is not. There has never been a final exchange that was not mine. Do you know what I am, blood of Viltrum? I've read the file, Harry said, same as you read mine. Then you know I do not collect strength. Darkseid did not raise his voice. He had never in his existence needed to. The galaxy drowns in strength. You yourself are the strongest thing this arm of it has produced, and I find you at the bottom of all that power entirely ordinary because your strength is not the interesting thing about you. I collect submission. I collect the moment a will that believed itself free discovers it was always going to kneel. I have collected gods. I have collected the will of entire species. And I have come a very long way, across a war I did not need to win, to collect yours, because a being who is both the strongest and the most stubborn is the rarest acquisition in creation, and I have an appetite for rare things. The chariot of fire drifted closer. You will kneel, Harry Potter, not because I will beat you. Beating you is beneath the exercise. You will kneel because I will show you, as I have shown every will I have ever broken, that there was never any other ending, that your freedom was a story you told yourself, and that underneath the story there was only ever the Omega, and the Omega is patient, and the Omega always, always wins. And Darkseid's eyes opened fully, and the Omega effect came for Harry's mind, not his body, the force that had unmade the will of gods, the red light that found the deepest truth of a being and rewrote it into kneeling, and it poured into Harry across the silent sky and reached for the place where his self lived. It found the voice first. That was the thing Harry had not expected, and it was the thing that saved him. The Omega effect reached into him hunting for the deepest truth of Harry Potter, the foundation it could rewrite, and the first thing it found was the Conqueror's voice. The patient cold inheritance that had whispered to him since the vault, and the Omega recognized it, because the Omega and the voice were old acquaintances, both of them in the business of telling the strong that domination was the only truth. For an instant the two of them aligned, the god's will and the blood's voice, and together they pressed Harry toward the knee. And Harry, who had spent a year learning the one skill that mattered, did the thing he had practiced 10,000 times in smaller fights. He did not resist the voice. He had never been able to resist it. That had never been the trick. The trick was older and harder and entirely his own. He held the leash. It was the only thing he knew how to do, and he had done it 10,000 times, and the Omega had never met its like. The red light poured the whole certainty of conquest into him, and where it expected to find a self clutching at itself, a will gripping its own freedom in terror of losing it, it found instead a man who had spent a year learning to hold the most dangerous thing in creation with his hands open. And in the place the Omega reached for, the foundation it meant to rewrite, Harry heard, not his own voice but theirs. Shaira, blunt and fierce, this is the door, this is exactly how it starts, prove me wrong about your blood. Dinah, warm under steel, those are people you don't get to do their math for them, that's the whole job. Zatanna, dark eyes serious under the showmanship, the bell note was the restraint. And Diana, regal and unflinching, the truest of them, we are not your weakness, we are the reason your blood has never won an argument. They were not in the sky with him. They were spent and scattered, and one of them was bleeding 1,000 miles below. But they were in the foundation, woven through it, given freely and held in trust. And the Omega effect that had unmade the will of gods raked through Harry Potter hunting for a thing to break and found only a structure built out of other people's love, which is the one architecture in the universe that has no single stone to pull. You've made the same mistake everyone makes, Harry said, and his voice came out steady because the steadiness was the whole of him, the achievement of 1,000 quiet refusals. You think the truth at the bottom of me is the voice, the strength, the conqueror. You think if you reach the deepest part of me you'll find a thing that wants to dominate, same as you, and you'll just point it downward and make it kneel. The Omega light raked through him, hunting and found, beneath the voice, beneath the strength, beneath all of it, the actual foundation, and recoiled, because the foundation was not what it expected. But the voice isn't the bottom of me, it's just the loudest thing. Underneath it there's the part that's been telling it no every hour for a year, and that part wasn't built out of strength. It was built out of being told the truth by people who loved me. And here's the thing your Omega can't rewrite, the thing no force in any universe can touch. He lifted his head and the red light broke against him and did not move him. They gave it to me freely. The thing that holds me up, it wasn't taken and it wasn't earned and it wasn't conquered, so there's nothing for you to dominate, because domination only works on things people are clutching. You can't make me let go of a thing I'm not holding with my fists. I'm holding it with my hands open. That's the difference between us, Darkseid. You've spent eternity learning to make wills kneel. You never once learned what to do with a will that was given away on purpose and got handed back stronger. The Omega effect faltered. It had unmade gods. It had never once met a foundation that did not belong in the end to the one being defended, because it had never met a being whose foundation had been built, brick by freely given brick, by other people and held in trust rather than in possession. There was nothing to break because there was nothing being gripped. Harry stood in the full force of the will that had broken the will of species, and he did not kneel, and across the silent sky, the god of tyrants experienced, for the first time in an existence longer than Earth's species, a thing he had spent that entire existence ensuring he would never feel. He experienced doubt. Now, Harry said, and he stopped defending and started moving. He had not arranged the empty sky only to face Darkseid alone out of vanity, whatever the god believed. He had arranged it because he had learned, in a year of fights, that you won the ones you'd already won before they started, by knowing the ground and the enemy and the exact thing you meant to do. And the exact thing he meant to do had two halves, the wizard and the other thing, and he had spent the whole war waiting for the one instant Darkseid's certainty would crack enough to let both halves land at once. He went at the god with the throttle wide, the full enormous flood of himself, every ceiling gone, the largest he had ever been. And he hit Darkseid with a blow that he had been saving, that he had not spent on the fleet or the legions or even on saving Diana. A blow with the entire top of his strength behind it and his hand, crucially, still on the throttle, still his. It caught Darkseid across the graven jaw and moved him, actually moved him, the mountain shape of him driven backward off the chariot of fire, and the silent sky rang with the impossibility of it, because Darkseid did not get moved. Darkseid was the thing that moved others. But strength alone would not finish a god, and Harry had never intended it to. The blow was not the attack. The blow was the distraction. Because while the whole flood of his strength occupied Darkseid's body, the other half of Harry, the wizard, the part that had hunted Horcruxes and sealed a dark lord in a room with no doors, was already working, had been working since the Omega effect faltered, tracing the structure of the thing in front of him the way he had traced Voldemort's vessel, finding the spine of it. And the spine of Darkseid was the same as the spine of every conqueror Harry had ever faced. It was the certainty. It was the absolute belief that everything kneels, the foundation the Omega itself rested on, and Harry had just proven with his open hands and his freely given foundation that the belief was false. He had introduced the one thing into Darkseid's universe that Darkseid's universe could not contain, which was a will that could not be made to kneel, and a thesis with a counterexample standing in front of it is a thesis that has already begun to fall. So Harry did the working. Not a banishing of the body which no magic could manage, a banishing of the certainty. He took the proof he had just become, the living counterexample, and with the wizard's magic he made it total, made it undeniable, forced the truth of it into the graven mind across every channel the Omega had opened reaching for him. Everything does not kneel. Here is the proof. It is standing in front of you and it will not, and you cannot make it, and that means your entire existence has rested on a lie, and the lie is breaking now in real time in front of the only audience that ever mattered, which is yourself. Harry pressed it. He kept the throttle wide and his hand on it both, the impossible balance the asteroids had taught him, and he drove the god backward through the empty sky, each blow exactly as hard as the work required and laced through, now with the wizards working so that the strength occupied the body while the magic worked the certainty. Darkseid struck back, and the blows were the heaviest things Harry had ever taken, heavier than the lance, heavier than dying, and he took them and did not break, because a body at the very top of Viltrumite's strength with a foundation the Omega could not move was a thing even a god had to work to harm. They fought across the ruin of two armies, the conqueror of 1,000 worlds and the heir of a deserter, and with every exchange the hairline in Darkseid's certainty widened, because he was being made to try, and trying was the proof, and the proof was the weapon Harry had been building since the fight began. Darkseid roared, and it was the first sound of effort the universe had ever heard him make. It was Corvale who ended it in the end, and that was the seed that Harry had planted in a wrecked turbine hall, paying its final and largest dividend. The Viltrumite officer had not left. He had hung at the edge of the spent battle with the remnant of his vanguard, watching, the crack in his certainty grown into something he no longer had a name for, and when Darkseid roared and faltered, when the god of tyrants was driven back by a being who would not kneel, Corvale made the choice that 400 years of empire had never once let him make. He made it for the Empire's reasons, he would tell himself afterward, for pride, because no Viltrumite could permit Apocalypse to claim a Viltrumite asset, because letting Darkseid win here would announce to the galaxy that the Empire had a master. He made it for those reasons. But Harry, who had learned to read the things in faces that people did not want read, saw the other reason underneath, the real one, the one Corvale could not yet say even to himself, that he had watched a son of Viltrum stand between a god and the weak, and had found, against 10,000 years of doctrine, that he wanted that son to win. Viltrum does not kneel, Corvale bellowed in the language of the Empire, and he brought the remnant of his vanguard down on Darkseid's flank. 300 years of war turned, for the first time in the officer's existence, in defense of something instead of in conquest of it. And the Paradigm legions, leaderless in the things faltering, broke before the combined fury of a Viltrumite vanguard, and a being the Omega could not bend. And the sky over earth became, for one impossible moment, the sight of the empire of conquerors and the heir of a deserter fighting side by side against the god of tyrants. Darkseid, faltering, doubting, flanked, did the thing that gods do instead of dying, because gods do not die. They withdraw and they wait, and they tell themselves it was always their choice. The continental boom tube tore open behind him, and he stepped back toward it, and his red gaze found Harry one last time across the ruined sky. "This is not a defeat," Darkseid said, and the certainty had returned to his voice, but it had a hairline through it now that would never fully close, and both of them heard it. "I do not lose, I withdraw. The Omega is patient. I will study this thing you have done, this foundation I could not break, and I will return having learned to break it, because everything kneels in the end, and I have all the time there has ever been." "No," Harry said. "You'll study it, and you'll come back, and you'll find I've taught the whole galaxy how to do it by then. That's the thing about a counterexample, Darkseid. You only need one. After that, the lie can never be total again, because everyone who's ever knelt to you now knows it was always a choice. You didn't lose a fight today. You lost the only thing you ever had, which was everyone believing you couldn't be refused." He let his open hands hang at his sides. "Go on, study it. I'll be here. So will they. So will everyone you've ever made kneel once the word gets out, and the word always gets out." And Darkseid, for the first time in the memory of any living thing, withdrew without the last word, because there was no last word that would survive the open hands of a man who would not kneel. And the boom tube swallowed him and the legions and the long red certainty of him. And Harry, with the wizard's magic, sealed it behind him the way he had sealed Tom Riddle, a door with no other side, so that whatever Darkseid had withdrawn into, he would have to find his own long way back from it. The sky over Earth went quiet, and then it went impossibly blue. They found him there, the League, what was left of their strength, rising one by one out of the wreckage to where he hung in the suddenly blue sky. Clark reached him first, battered and graying with exhaustion, and he did not say anything clever because there was nothing clever to say. He simply put out his hand, the way he had in a garden months ago, and the two strong men shook with the exquisite mutual care of beings who knew exactly what their hands could do. And this time Harry understood it fully, the thing Clark had been teaching him since the diner and the wheat prices, that the whole of the work was choosing, every day, to be gentle with a strength that could be anything. You held, Clark said, and that was all, and it was everything. Around them the others gathered, the flash gone gray and grinning, the lanterns lowering their spent constructs, Jaeon's grave calm voice in all their minds at once saying the names of the saved, which were so many more than anyone had dared to hope. They had lost the opening exchange, exactly as Batman promised. News of it went around the world before the dust had finished falling, though the world only ever got the shape of it and never the truth. They saw the sky fill with gods and then go blue. They saw the warships withdraw and the darkness behind the moon close. They did not see a man hold his hands open in front of the Omega and refuse to kneel, because the only witnesses to that were a god who would never speak of it and 4 women who would only ever tell it to each other. The world invented its own story, as worlds do, and the story was wrong in all the particulars and right in the only thing that mattered, which was that they had been saved, and that the people who saved them had asked for nothing and would be there again. They had spent the seconds Harry bought them, and they had done the thing no world had ever done, and the sky was blue, and the cities below were full of people who would never know how close it had come, which was exactly as it should be. The Empire's reckoning came an hour later, when the dust had begun to settle and the dead had begun to be counted, which were fewer than anyone had dared hope, because a man had spent a year learning to fight in a way that made rescues out of slaughters. Corvale came to Harry where he stood on the broken span above the city of 11 million, the city Diana had bled to save, and the officer hung in the air before him, ancient and broken and changed, his vanguard a remnant at his back, and for a long moment the 2 Viltrumites simply regarded each other, the gardener and the thing he had been sent to correct. "I am obliged to make a report," Corvale said at last, "to the Grand Regent, on the disposition of this world." His weighing eyes moved over the blue sky, the saved city, the small, enormous being in front of him. "I find that I do not know what to put in it. Doctrine is clear. The world resisted. The world must be corrected." And yet, the officer was quiet a moment, and the crack in his certainty showed plainly now, and he did not try to hide it, which was its own kind of revolution. "And yet I have just fought beside a son of Viltrum against the god of apocalypse in defense of a world of insects, and I did not feel doing it that I had betrayed the Empire. I felt that I had, for the first time in 400 years, been worthy of something. I do not have a doctrine for that. The Empire does not have a word for it, except the word it uses for the ones who turn, and I have spent my life believing that word meant weakness." He looked at Harry. "You made me wonder in a turbine hall whether I was wrong to kill the 3 who turned. I am no longer wondering. I was wrong, and I find that knowing it I cannot make the report doctrine requires." "Then don't," Harry said. "Make a different one. Tell him the world's not worth the fleet it would cost. Tell him there's a Viltrumite here who beat his vanguard and stood off Darkseid and seeded a thing in your blood you can't unfeel. Tell him the truth, which is that the Empire just discovered in front of the whole galaxy that one of its own would rather defend the weak than conquer them, and that the word he's so afraid of, the word for the ones who turn, just stopped meaning weakness and started meaning something the Empire has no defense against." Harry held the officer's gaze. "There are others like Voss, you told me, scattered, hunted, each one believing it's the last. Find them. You know how the Empire hunts them, so you know how to reach them first. Tell them they're not the last. Tell them there's a son of a deserter on a little blue world who proved that turning isn't the end of strength, it's the beginning of it being worth something." He let that land. "You wanted to bring me home, Corvale, you can't, but you could go and build the home instead, the one the Empire's been telling all of you for 10,000 years couldn't exist." Corvale was silent for a long time. Then he inclined his head, the fraction of a degree that was, from a Viltrumite officer, the deepest bow in the language of his kind. "You understand what you are asking of me," Corvale said before he answered, and for a moment the officer's whole ancient certainty hung between them like a held breath. "To carry this word is to become the thing I have spent 400 years hunting. The Empire does not forgive the ones who turn. It will send officers after me, the way it sent me after the 3 I killed. I will spend the rest of a very long life as the thing I most despised, hunted through the dark alone." He looked at Harry, and the crack in him had become, somewhere in the last hour, a door. "And I find that I would rather be hunted for a true thing than honored for a lie. You did that. In a turbine hall with a single question, and then in this sky with your hands open against a god. You made the lie unbearable. I cannot go back to it now. I have tried, standing here, to imagine making the doctrines report the correction, the dead world, and I cannot make my mouth shape it. The fleet will withdraw," he said. "I will make the report, not the doctrines report. Mine." He rose, and his remnant rose with him, and at the edge of the blue sky he paused, and the last thing he said in the old language, the one Harry knew in his blood and had never been taught, and it was not a threat, and it was not a farewell. It was the word the Empire used for the ones who turned, the worst word their language had, except Corvale said it the way you say a name you have decided to be proud of. And then he was gone, up into the dark, carrying the seed of the Empire's unmaking home, and Harry watched him go and understood that he had not ended a war today. He had started a much larger and slower and more hopeful one, and that it would outlast him, and that this was the best thing a person could do with a long life and a dangerous gift. Diana healed slowly, which frightened the others and did not frighten Diana, who had been hurt before and understood that healing was a kind of work and could be done well or badly and intended to do it well. They put her in the Watchtower's medical bay over her objections, and the 5 of them gathered there because the observation deck had been one of the casualties of the war and the medical bay was where Diana was, and where Diana was had become without anyone deciding it, where they all ended up. "You let go of the rage," Diana said. She was propped against pillows she had complained about at length, and her color was better, and her eyes were as direct as they had ever been. "On the span, with me bleeding in your arms and a god in the sky. The voice opened the door all the way, and you saw it open, and you did not walk through." She studied him. "Tell me how. I have lived 4,000 years, and I nearly walked through it the day they took my mother's island, and you are not yet 30, and you did not. I want to know how so that I can do it next time." "You told me how," Harry said. "That's the whole answer. You said the rage wears love's face, but love protects and rage avenges. And you said don't make you the reason I died inside." He looked around at the 4 of them, Diana in the bed, Dinah perched on its edge, Zatanna cross-legged on the floor with her back against the frame, Shayra standing with her arms crossed and her wings tucked and her customary refusal to sit. "That's the how. It was never something I did alone." The voice's whole pitch from the very first day was that I'd never be alone if I just became the thing it wanted. And the joke, the thing it never understood, is that I stopped being alone the moment I decided not to. You 4 are the how, the League is the how. A child's drawing in a corridor that somebody updated to include me is the how. I don't hold the leash by being strong. I hold it because there are people who will tell me the truth, and I love them enough to listen, and that turns out to be stronger than anything in my blood, stronger than the Empire, stronger than the Omega. Open hands, Diana. You can't dominate what someone's holding with open hands. "That's very pretty," said Zatanna, "and also true, which is annoying because now I can't tease you for it." She tilted her head up at him from the floor, dark eyes warm. "I felt you from orbit, the day you woke. The whole hemisphere sat up. I told you the bell note was the restraint, remember? I was close. I've worked out the rest of it now." She unfolded and stood. The bell note was the open hands, the strongest thing on the rock, holding everything it loves without a single clenched fist. "I've met love gods, Harry. None of them ever rang like that." Dinah laughed low and easy and reached over to take Harry's hand, the warmth in it, the warmth she no longer bothered to pretend was on purpose. "I keep a list," she said, "of the things people do when nobody's keeping score. You stood between a god and the world and didn't take the kill when it was free, again, because of course you did. You're so far at the top of the list now it's not even a list anymore. It's just your name." She squeezed his hand. "My mother would have liked how this turned out, the whole thing, all of us. She'd have pretended to disapprove and then she'd have made you breakfast." "I don't share well," Shayra said into the quiet, the same words she had said the night the 4 of them chose this, and she said them now the way you say a thing you have made your peace with. "I told you that, it's still true. I'm Thanagarian, I'm territorial, there are nights it's going to be hard." She uncrossed her arms and she crossed the room, and she did the thing Shayra Hall did not do, which was reach out and put her blunt scarred hand against the side of Harry's face, fierce and cert. "But I watched you stand off the god of tyrants with your hands open, and I decided a long time ago I'd rather do a hard thing I believe in than an easy thing I don't. I believe in this, I believe in you. And if any of you tells me I went soft about it, I'll deny it, and then I'll hit you." But she was almost smiling when she said it, which from Shayra was the same as weeping with joy, and they all knew it. And Diana, from the bed, watched the 4 of them around her, the family that had assembled itself out of the wreckage of 2 empires and one lonely man's refusal to become a monster. And she said in the regal level voice that made true things truer by the saying, "Then it holds." Through a dark lord and an empire and a god it held, and they all made the same mistake, every one of them, the oldest mistake the strong make. They thought love was the weakness. They aimed it at us like a blade, and it turned in their hands every time, because we were never your weakness, Harry. We were the thing your blood could never win an argument against. We chose you, freely. And what is given freely cannot be stolen, and cannot be dominated, and cannot be corrected, and will outlast every empire that ever mistook a clenched fist for strength. She held out her hand, and Harry took it, and the 5 of them were quiet a while in the bright room above the turning world. And what passed between them in that quiet belonged to them and to no enemy and no record, and it was warm, and it was chosen, and it was theirs. They stayed there through the night cycle, the 5 of them in the bright room above the turning world, and there was no hurry in any of it, because hurry was a thing that belonged to people afraid of running out of time. And Harry had a very long life ahead of him now, and intended to spend a great deal of it exactly here with these 4, learning the shape of a thing the universe had no map for, and they were drawing as they went. Diana healed. Dinah teased her about the pillows until she threw one, which was a good sign, and everyone said so. Zatanna conjured tea that did not survive Harry's grip and reinforced the next cup with a charm and timed how long it lasted and lost the bet to herself, laughing. Shaira sat finally at the foot of the bed, which from Shaira was a surrender so total that none of them dared remark on it. It was not the ordinary kind of happiness, the kind with one person and a quiet house. It was something stranger and larger, chosen by 5 people who had each looked at the most dangerous being alive and at each other and decided, freely and without being moved, that this was the thing they wanted, and the strangeness of it was a great part of why it was theirs and no one else's, and proof against every power that had tried to name it a weakness. He took the disc out the night the fleet withdrew and set it on the table in his quarters the way he had set it on his kitchen table the first morning, and he waited to see what it would say. For a long while it said nothing. Then it warmed faintly, the lines glowing low, and the voice that had whispered conquest to him for years spoke, and it had changed, the way a thing changes when it has watched its every argument fail. "You did not become me," the disc said. It was not an accusation, and it was not quite wonder, but it was nearer to wonder than the disc had ever come. "In 10,000 years of waking in the blood of the strong, I have never once failed to be answered. I am the voice of what we are. I am the part that knows strength is the only argument. And you held the leash for a year, and then you held it against a god, and you never once let go, and now the voice in your blood has nothing left to say because everything it knew has been disproved by the one who carries it." Pause, the lines flickering. "Voss disproved me too for a while, but Voss hid. Voss thinned the blood and ran. You did not hide. You stood in the open with your hands open in front of everything that came, and you won, and that is a thing I did not know we could do." "What happens now?" Harry asked it. "To you, to the voice." "I remember," the disc said. "That is what I am for, record and remember. And I will remember this, the heir who would not kneel and would not conquer, and the next time I wake in the blood of someone strong, 4 generations from now, 8, I will have a different thing to whisper. Not surrender, not conquest." The lines dimmed toward sleep, and the last of it was quieter than Harry had ever heard it. "I will whisper your name and the open hands and the 4 who held you, and perhaps the one I waken next will have a little less far to walk than you did." That is the most an old voice can hope for, to learn, to pass on a better thing than it was given. The disc went dark and cool, and it did not feel like sulking this time, and it did not feel like waiting. It felt, for the first time, like rest. Harry left it on the table, the way he always had, because hiding from a thing was how it won, and he had never once hidden, and he was not going to start now that the thing had finally, after 10,000 years, begun to change its mind. He went back to Godric's Hollow at the end of it, the way he had promised, and he flew low and slow over the dark spine of the country he had bled to keep, and he came down soft in the field behind the cottage, soft enough that the grass only bowed and did not break, because he had learned that on his very first morning and had never once forgotten it. He stood over his parents' graves in the grey dawn. James Potter. "Lily Potter, the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. It held Dad," he said. "All of it. The Empire came and a god came, and the thing in our blood whispered the whole time, and it held." He crouched and laid his hand flat on the cold granite, careful, the way he had been careful with everything fragile since the morning a teacup came apart in his fingers. "You were right about the voice. You were right that the frightening part was how reasonable it'd feel. But you left something out, and I don't blame you. You couldn't have known. You only had the family story, and Voss only told them the warning, not the answer." He was quiet a moment, the dawn coming up cold and clean over the village that had slept through the saving of the world. "The answer's people, that's all. You can't hold the leash alone, nobody can, not for a whole life. The voice never gets tired, and you do, but you don't have to hold it alone. You hold it together with people who love you enough to tell you the truth and grab your arm when you stop being able to tell it to yourself." Voss had a Peveril girl who wouldn't stop telling him number I've got 4 of them, and a league, and a child's drawing in a corridor. That's the answer to the whole thing. That's how you're good when you're strong enough to be anything. You let yourself be loved by people who aren't afraid of you, and then you don't want to be the monster anymore because you've finally got something better to be. The sun cleared the hedge. Behind him, 3 more shapes came down out of the brightening sky, light on the turned earth, and a 4th descended a moment later on beating wings, because of course they had followed him, because where Harry was had become where they all ended up, and they came to stand with him over the graves of the 2 people who had asked him, in the smallest inheritance anyone ever tried to hand him, only to be good. "Is this them?" Diana asked softly, though she was still meant to be resting, and Dinah gave her a look that said so. "This is them," Harry said. "Mum, Dad. This is them." He felt them gather close around him in the cold dawn, the 4 who had chosen him and whom he had chosen, and he was aware, standing over the 2 graves with the living warmth of them at his back, of the strange, completed symmetry of it. That Voss had been turned by one mortal who would not stop telling him the truth, and that Voss's heir had been held, across the worst year and the largest war the world had ever seen, by four who would not, and that this was not weakness and had never been weakness, that it was in fact the strongest structure anyone had ever built, the only one that two empires and a god had thrown themselves against and failed to break. Diana read the headstone aloud softly, the regal voice gentled almost to nothing. "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." She was quiet a moment. "On my island we have a different saying, that the dead are not gone while the living carry what they asked for." She looked at Harry. "They asked you to be good, you carried it through everything. They are not gone." And he stood in the field he had taught himself to land in without breaking, the strongest thing the world had ever made, holding everything he loved with his hands open, a conqueror's heir who had chosen every single day against a voice that never tired to protect instead of rule, and would go on choosing it for a very long life, surrounded by the people who were the reason he could. Above them the sky was blue and empty of fleets and full of morning, and somewhere out in the dark a beaten officer flew toward the scattered hidden remnant of everyone who had ever turned, carrying a word that had stopped meaning weakness, and the slow hopeful war that would outlast them all had already quietly begun. Chapter 7 End.